How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I don't know why Todd's Arnold impression makes him sound mentally handicapped.
Because it sounds like he's being electrocuted in slow motion,
or just somebody has stuck something up his butt without him knowing it was going to happen.
Imagine Arnold like feeding one of his children, but doing like "Here comes the airplane," like "Here comes the airplane."
Have you ever heard Arnold Schwarzenegger actually talk?
Well, we promised we were going to jump into these episodes. So, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock, the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We're just three guys. If this is your first time listening, we're just three guys who have been lifelong friends, and we read way too much shit about movies, and we love talking about them, especially the people behind the movies, the stories behind them, the directors, the writers, all that stuff. So that's what we do here. And I'm one of your hosts that does that. I'm Gary Horne.
Hey, and I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis, a.k.a. the TITANIC. Welcome to this, our first chapter in our look at the unsinkable visionary James Cameron, the man of tomorrow. Today, we'll discuss The Boss versus the Juice, why receptionists fear Lance Henriksen, and what movie made Jimmy Cameron puke.
I don't think anyone's ever called you the Todd-nator, Todd. I'll be honest.
I'm trying to get it going, Justin.
Well, we'll try. We'll just start to refer to you as the Todd-nator from here on out.
And to be fair, all people should just naturally fear Lance Henriksen.
That's true. Very true. Yeah.
I bet he's very nice, actually.
He seems nice. I'm just saying you should
Scary
have a
voice.
Bears are useful, but you should have a healthy fear of them.
I wouldn't ever say that I've met a nice bear. I mean, I haven't gotten close enough to one. I don't know. Winnie the Pooh?
Say Winnie the Pooh until his horror movie comes out.
Until that Blood Nutty comes out.
Oh.
Anyway, let's get into the story of James Cameron. So for the last few series on this show, we've covered filmmakers who I think could more easily be considered cult filmmakers. When we describe this show, we say that it's an exploration of the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. And a lot of the ones that we've talked about have been in specifically the cult category. I think even though some of these filmmakers have had some big hits, they've primarily kind of existed on the fringes of Hollywood, with their hits feeling more like the exceptions than the rules in their career. These are cult filmmakers who their sensibilities sometimes on occasion just happen to click with what audiences want. You've got guys like David Cronenberg. We've got filmmakers like the Wachowskis, Paul Verhoeven. All of these folks had big hits, but none of them ever felt like they were kind of like selling out to get those hits. Sometimes that meant that they would make films like, let's say, Showgirls or Cloud Atlas or even Videodrome that just didn't connect with audiences. But one thing that all of these filmmakers that we've discussed have in common is that they never compromise their vision as artists. If that vision happens to translate into solid box office numbers, that's all the better. But these are folks that are going to make the movies that they want to make regardless. And now we've talked about filmmakers in the past who have had to work begrudgingly within the studio system. I'm specifically thinking of Tobe Hooper and Dan O'Bannon when we talked about them. But a lot of these folks, they're making the movies they want to make. And sometimes for whatever reason, it just clicks with the zeitgeist. So for this series that we're starting on this episode, this new series that we're going to be going through for the next couple of months, we're going to be exploring the films of James Cameron, a filmmaker whose roots lie firmly within the B movie and genre film worlds, and a guy who absolutely does not compromise on what he wants to do, no matter if anyone tells him that his ideas are crazy, which, as we will get into, happens quite a lot. This is a guy who's always going to make the movie he wants to make, naysayers be damned. But the big difference between Cameron and some of these other filmmakers is that his vision almost always translates into box office success. He's still making the movies he wants to make, but people just want to go see them. Two of the movies that we're going to be talking about became the highest grossing movies of all time at the time of their release. Somehow James Cameron has tapped into the zeitgeist in a way that very few filmmakers can claim.
And it's honestly, if we're being honest, and I always try to be,
We try to be honest here.
it's not fair, because there's a lot of things that make you think this guy is a snob, besides just the reputation of some that he gets from some people, besides it seeming like for whatever reason he's built like a whole mythology around himself, that he seems like he's some kind of weird Tony Stark playboy, is a motorcycle riding gearhead. He goes deep sea diving in spots nobody's ever seen.
He's
before.
a man's man.
Yeah, he's playing with guns in the desert. He's supremely intelligent, and then somehow, some way, he still is a really great storyteller and makes good movies. And
He's
it's not fucking fair.
He's a complex man. But what is it about James Cameron that allows him to do this? What is it about his films that cause audiences to just flock to them, sometimes over and over and over again, as we saw, especially with Titanic and when it came out in 1997, and then some members of the audience even going into a deep depression because they can't physically live within the fictional worlds that he's created. That is something we'll talk about at the end of this series, I'm sure.
Wow.
So to begin to answer these questions, though, we've got to go back to the beginning, to Cameron's first major film, his first, I would say, official film that he directed, 1984's The Terminator.
In the 21st century, a weapon will be invented like no other. This weapon will be powerful, versatile, and indestructible. It can't be reasoned with. It can't be bargained with. It will feel no pity, no remorse, no pain, no fear. It will have only one purpose: to return to the present and prevent the future. This weapon will be called the Terminator.
You're dead, honey.
What day is it? The date!
12th May, Thursday.
What year? I'm here to help you. I'm Reese. DN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
What does it want me? Why me?
Arnold Schwarzenegger is the Terminator. Your future is in its hands.
Dum, 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 dum. It's a good song.
It is. It's
The
music, man. It's so good.
that intro music, and even the sweet song that plays, just the love making song is just nice. It's just it's a great score, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. If we do our job. We will.
So we're actually going to go back a little bit further than 1984. Because this is the first episode in this series, as we like to do on these series. If it's the first time we've talked about a filmmaker, we really like to get into their background, which makes these first episodes a little bit longer than the typical episode sometimes. But we feel that if you're going to study the films of James Cameron, you need to know a little bit about who James Cameron is as a person.
We leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, well,
and by we, I mean Justin.
Yeah, I mean there are some stones that I leave unturned, but mostly I try to peek under them. So our story here starts in Ontario in 1954, where James Francis Cameron was born. The son of an electrical engineer and an artist, Cameron was an incredibly intelligent and precocious child who had his father's mind for science, but his mother's passion and talent for the arts. So James was the oldest of 5 siblings. He and his closest brother, Mike, would often tinker and experiment. They'd build go-karts and tree houses. They're always like doing stuff. They would use erector sets to build these complex Rube Goldberg machines.
Nice.
It would should also be noted that Mike, we might talk about him in further episodes, because Mike Cameron would follow his father's footsteps and become an engineer, and he actually helped to create some of the filmmaking and diving technologies that James would later use on The Abyss and Titanic and his underwater documentaries. And at the same time as he was kind of exploring his technical side, Cameron was also exploring his artistic side. He loved to draw as a kid. He was always sketching. He'd always have a sketchbook on him. He would always win the local design and art contest in his little town there in Ontario. He was maybe a little bit of an overachiever, maybe a little too smart for his own good at times. He was a very omnivorous reader, I think is the best way to say it. That's not what my notes say, so I apologize for the pause. But as I was thinking about the kind of things that he was into, like he's especially into comic books. He's a big fan of Spider-Man, which I think is something that might come up later on in the series because he very nearly directed a Spider-Man movie.
I was wondering, man, that would be really cool.
Yeah,
I wonder what Spider-Man he's a fan of, if it was like Ramita or.
Well, he was growing up, and this would have been probably the 60s. So
so maybe Ditko or
early Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And also he was a big fan of science fiction writers, guys like Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, Ray Bradbury, Kurt Vonnegut. These were all writers that he just devoured their works. He loved it. And Cameron was intelligent enough to be able to skip 2 grades in elementary school. When I say that he's a little too smart for his own good, that was a little bit part of it, because when he arrived in high school, he was bullied because one, he was smaller than everyone else. You've got 15 and 16-year-olds, and he's 12 years old in high school, so he's smaller than everyone else. And he was smarter than everyone else. Bullies don't like that. So he would get bullied because of that. But he won like every academic prize that the school gave out for his grade, until later on he decided to stop trying quite as hard because he wanted to, I think, stop getting stuffed into lockers. So he was still very smart, but he's like, I'm going to stop trying to win all this stuff. So because I'm tired of getting a swirly.
But that's where he would get his passion for deep sea diving. Is all the swirlies. Yeah,
exactly.
That's important.
It probably also helped that he grew up to be like 6'4" or whatever he is. He's a very tall man. So once he hit that growth spurt, I think he was probably fine. So the town that Cameron grew up in Canada, it was hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. He had never actually visited the coast. He had never so much as stuck a toe in the ocean, but he did become obsessed with Jacques Cousteau's underwater documentaries, an obsession that would fuel him through his entire career. And he eventually convinced his parents to let him enroll in a scuba diving class at the YMCA in Buffalo, because he's near Niagara Falls, so he's not far over the American border. He's able to go to Buffalo. And it was there at the YMCA that he learned military-style diving. So as he reached his teenage years, as most teenagers do, he didn't know what he wanted to do as a career. What teenagers do. I'm 40 years old. I don't fucking know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Hopefully podcast. I'm going to be 60 years old. Nobody's going to be listening because podcasts will only be old people by then. I don't know what the youth will be listening to.
It's tough. I mean, I was thinking about this while I was reading about Cameron, and just like, I had a couple of Jacques Cousteau books that were like photo books, just like all of this stuff. And I loved looking at those as a kid. I love underwater stuff. All the Reddits I follow a lot of them are about weird underwater stuff. And I'm like, wow, I could have done something with that, I suppose, but instead I became a lazy piece of shit.
Well, I think that's
the thing about guys like Shane Black and Cameron, who, like, how we talked about Shane Black, sitting around reading mystery novels all day long. So Cameron's obsessed with sci-fi classics and these ace paperback novels, Harlan Ellison, whatever, who gets a credit in Terminator. It's like they did something with it, though.
Yeah, Cameron's the kind of guy who, like, if he gets really into something, he's going to pursue it. And he got into the idea of deep sea diving, doesn't live anywhere near an ocean, and he still took the initiative to learn how to dive, like by going to the YMCA. I mean, that tells you a lot, I think, about his personality. So he's a teenager at this point. He's trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do with my life. He's very interested in science. He's very into science. He's also very into art. And he wasn't sure how the two could coexist in a career, because there aren't a lot of careers that encompass both of those things. And then in 1968, he had an epiphany while watching a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's classic, possibly responsible for more filmmakers' careers than any other movie of all time. Maybe Star Wars is up there, but I would say that Star Wars wouldn't exist without 2001. So I'm going to say 2001 may be the most influential film on future filmmakers of all time, especially genre filmmakers.
Yeah, and it still looks great. It's
dude.
Yeah,
I saw it on IMAX a couple years ago, and it was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had.
It was pretty fantastic to see that, and to piggyback on what you're saying. I mean, in an interview I was reading with Cameron, he specifically, I think, talking about this movie, was saying that I always wanted to be a raconteur, a storyteller. I knew that. I wanted to create visually and produce images. I was always doing both. I'd be writing stories, painting, looking for a way to mesh them together. comics are a fusion of those two things. So it seemed like a natural thing for me that would be what I'd do. But I've been going to movies like a rabid maniac. And at a certain point, seeing them, I said, wait a minute. All of this is what a movie is. It's a visual medium with a narrative intent.
He would always create illustrations of stories that he would be reading or even stuff that he was writing as a kid. And he would do them because he was a comic book fan. So he would do them as a comic book. And at some point he did realize that the way he was composing his drawings were very cinematic. And if you can see some of these online. I've been watching the James Cameron Masterclass, and he shows some of them on there, where he shows some of these images that he was drawing, and they're framed almost more like a movie than like a traditional comic book. It's like that was just something that inherently was almost natural to him. Wild. He just didn't know it at the time. So he goes to see 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he is absolutely stunned by the film. He actually says that as soon as the film was over, he ran outside of the theater and just puked everywhere. Not because the movie wasn't good, it was because he had never been that immersed in a movie. And that final scene, or the final sequence, the Star Child sequence, kind of gave him vertigo. Yeah, because he'd never experienced anything like that on a big screen before. And so he came out and just puked everywhere. But then he saw the movie many more times. He just kept going back to it. He knew that this film was intelligent and beautiful and like just unlike anything he had ever seen. And all of a sudden, watching 2001, he's like, I knew that this is what I had to do. I've got to make movies. But he didn't think of himself as a director. That was never in his mind at this time. He wanted to be the guy who made the special effects, which that does fit in with his love, his love of both science and art. It makes sense. He's going to be the guy that builds the spaceships. He's also studying 2001: A Space Odyssey. He says that it was one of the first books he ever had, or one of the first books he ever even saw that was about the making of a film, was one that he picked up about the making of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he would like study it like crazy. So he starts studying that. He's trying to figure out how Kubrick does, how he pulls off some of the effects, because some of the effects in that film had never been done before. Even though we had this making of book, it's not as detailed as like some of the stuff that we now have access to, where it really breaks it down. Because Kubrick's doing stuff in this movie that is like nobody's done it. So without that documentation, it's like him in his mind trying to figure out how the hell did this happen. So he decides he's going to start making some movies. Him and his buddy get a hold of a Super 8 camera. I think it was his buddy's dad's camera. This is the same story that so many filmmakers of this era have, guys like Steven Spielberg, everyone picked up their dad's Super 8 camera.
I was just thinking, I was like, Spielberg has a similar story, doesn't he?
Yeah. So, and they start making their own little DIY sci-fi movies, building their own models and things like that. Cameron's about 16 years old or so at this point. Cameron's father got a promotion. It was one that would actually move them from their small town near Niagara Falls in Canada all the way to Orange County, California. And when Cameron heard the news, he was like, can we leave today? He's ready to go. Not because he didn't like Canada, because he wants to be close to Hollywood. Orange County, he's going to be 30 miles from Hollywood, where all these movies that he loves are being made. So they move out to California. He finishes up high school. Then in the early 70s, Cameron attends Fullerton College. He's going to college, which is a little like community college there in Orange County. At the same time, while he's going to college, he's working on all his creative stuff on the side. He's writing sci-fi stories. He's drawing. He's painting. Sometimes he's got little side jobs where he's like a sign painter and things like that, things that allow him to use his art. And then while he's in college, he starts dating a woman named Sharon Williams. She was about a year younger than him, another college student there at Fullerton. She introduced him to a guy named Bill Wisher. Bill Wisher was a little bit younger than them, a couple years, but he was another guy who was very interested in getting into filmmaking. So they kind of become buddies, like film nerd buddies, like us, guys that just like they hang out and they talk about movies.
They could have done a podcast, but
they made multi-billion-dollar movies.
Yeah,
if that's how you measure success.
Guarantee you, Cameron plenty of times has thought, I wish I had recorded myself talking about this. Otherwise, nobody will ever know what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So the two of them are friends. They meet another Fullerton College student named Randall Frakes. He's a year or so older than Cameron, I think. He's another big fan of sci-fi and fantasy. And Frakes read some of Cameron's sci-fi stories, and he's like, man, you're a really good science fiction writer. Cameron was not writing these as movies. He was just writing like short stories, sci-fi short stories, like the stuff he grew up reading. But Frakes pushed him to write screenplays, to turn some of these stories into screenplays, because he could see his talent. It was something that Cameron had never really thought about, but he took the suggestion of his friend and he started kind of working some of these stories into screenplays.
He had kind of gotten out of his sci-fi stuff, like going into college. I don't know, maybe it was swirlies in a toilet or something, but he was like, well, I got to get more focused back on the real world at a certain point, and like maybe I get a different perspective on things. But then he said the more time he spent day to day, he realized that sci-fi writers actually had the best perspective on life, according to him. He said that everybody else is mired in these specifics of day to day, and sci-fi writers just have so much more visionary ideas.
So at this time, Cameron, he's finishing up college. He's working a variety of blue collar jobs at the time. He is a typical broke college student. He's working as a janitor, a truck driver, a gas station attendant, where he's the guy pumping your gas. But at night, he's always writing, he's painting, and he's hanging out with Frakes and Wisher, and they're always talking about movies. After work, they'd go and meet at a diner, have some coffee, have some pie, and talk about movies all night long. Then on the weekends, he would go to the library at the University of Southern California. He wasn't a student there. Again, he's going to a little community college, but he'd go and hang out in the library, and he would photocopy graduate students' papers on filmmaking techniques, especially really esoteric filmmaking techniques that you couldn't learn in a book that you bought at the store about the making of 2001. He's trying to get more into the very technical stuff. What he's doing is he's teaching himself visual effects at one of the country's top film schools without ever attending a class and without ever meeting a professor. He's just teaching himself on the weekends. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
So around this time, Cameron and Sharon Williams, they get married. They would be married for a little while, but as we'll get into, most of his marriages don't last very long. But they do get married at this time. And it was around the time that they got married, late 70s, that another science fiction movie came out in theaters. And Cameron once again had kind of an epiphany. The year was 1977. So as you could probably guess, that movie is Star Wars. He sees Star Wars, and more importantly, he sees the success of Star Wars. Science fiction is very, very much in the pop culture at this point. Mm-hmm. So Cameron, Frakes, and Wisher, they decide we're going to make our own movie, our own sci-fi epic. So they start working on this. It's a little film called Xenogenesis. Gary, you got a chance to watch this, right?
I did, and I'm gonna just to throw it in here. We talked about it a little before we started hitting record, but we're working on the YouTube. So all the episodes are going to be there, but also finding people seem to be lax with trailers and certain things. So Xenogenesis is one I think I'd like to get thrown up on our YouTube if we can. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, it'll be there. It's pretty fucking impressive, actually. It's especially, even apps today can help you make a lot of effects, but to think about it even in that way, but even if it was made today, it's still pretty damned impressive.
It's pretty damn impressive. Yeah. This is it's only 12 minutes long or so. So the way that they went about doing this, they wrote the script together, the three of them. The money came from a friend of a friend's dad, who was an accountant for a bunch of Orange County dentists who were looking for somewhere to invest their money. Cameron, he brought some of his paintings to the group to kind of show him his visual talent, show him that, that he is an artist that can help create this kind of stuff. He pitched the idea of the film to this group of dentists, and he walked away with about $30,000 to create a scene from the film. The $30,000 was just to create basically a single sequence from the film that they could show to these investors to kind of show them what they can do. This still gets done now. People will make a proof of concept. They'll make a trailer, and then they'll take that to investors to show, hey, we've got chops to do a full film. This is what it's going to look like.
Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert did pretty much the exact same thing for Evil Dead. In fact, I think they went to dentists.
Yeah. The agreement was that they'd show this footage. If it looked good, maybe there'd be some more money to turn it into a full-length feature.
There, and it's to be fair, we should just really spend some time just giving the dentist credit, since we buried them on the Little Shop of Horrors episode.
That was one specific dentist that had some weird stuff going on in his life.
They also helped launch James Cameron's career in a way.
Yeah. Sure. It is a well-known fact that nobody balls harder than a dentist.
Is it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's well known. It's
Oh, wow.
it's the subtext of every hip hop song for the last 15 to 20 years.
I
Honestly.
mean, you jest, but I mean, a major factor in hip hop artists are the grills that they sport.
Oh, wow. Hey.
So, you
all
can't
coming
get there
together.
without the dentist. So, not a lot of love given to dentists. They deserve it.
Well, so they're starting to work on this film, and they had not really decided, like, hey, you're going to be the director, I'm going to be this guy, whatever. They were going to make this movie together, but James Cameron, being James Cameron, he kind of took charge, took over, and essentially became the film's unofficial director. And the film is, it is very impressive for what it is. It's not going to blow your socks off if you don't know the context, I don't think, of what it is. But for three guys who had never made a movie before and had never attended film school, they're making a movie, and not just any short film, but a high concept science fiction film. And every technique that they use, they basically learned from reading books. It's wild.
It's a 12-minute thing, but it's essentially a giant robot fight, which is cool enough on its own.
It is essentially the HK from Terminator versus Ripley from Aliens, because it's a girl in
that's a great point.
In the power loader.
Yeah.
I mean, the robots, the giant robots that are the bad guys in Xenogenesis look very, very much like the HKs from Terminator.
Nice.
That's true. And I never thought about the alien side of it, but that's 100% true. There's the girl in the
she's in a power loader. Yeah.
Yeah.
And instead of fighting the alien queen, she's fighting a Terminator hunter killer is what she's doing. Yeah.
Wow.
So these dentists, they never signed on for a full-length version of the film. I'm not really sure why. Maybe they just, I don't know. Maybe they got cold feet. Because the footage, as we mentioned, is pretty good. But the footage, at least it was there. They had that in their possession. So that gave James Cameron a pretty great demo reel, something he could show to people to prove that he knew how to build models, how to create special effects, how to shoot in 35 millimeter with a special effects camera. Basically, this is his resume now, because he didn't have anything else. He hadn't made anything else. So he takes this footage to Roger Corman's New World Pictures, who happened to be doing their own riff on Star Wars, a film called Battle Beyond the Stars. And yeah, that does mean that once again, we've arrived at Roger Corman, as often happens on these episodes.
Yes.
The 6 degrees of Roger Corman.
I was going to say, it was like Kevin Bacon gets all that love, but really Roger Corman's like,
he really is,
he's
man.
in everything.
You could go less than 6 degrees on most filmmakers and find your way to Roger Corman. Even on films that he wasn't technically involved with, he is somewhere in the story. Like it's wild for the last 60 years.
Yeah, very, very prolific. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Corman made a career out of making genre films, B movies. But what happened is after Jaws and Star Wars, he saw Hollywood coming for his bread and butter. They were all of a sudden, Hollywood is making the kinds of movies that he had always made, but they're doing it with a bigger budget. Corman knew that he had to throw everything at this movie that he was making, Battle Beyond the Stars. He knew that this was a big deal. Like, if I'm going to compete with the big boys, I gotta spend more than the $15,000 that I spent on Little Shop of Horrors or whatever it was.
Right.
So Battle Beyond the Stars at $2 million would be Corman's most expensive production to date ever. Which is still really low, even in the late 70s, early 80s. $2 million for a science fiction film is incredibly low. One of the ways that he had to cut corners to save a little bit of money was that instead of hiring an outside special effects team, he simply created his own effects department. He had a TV effects supervisor named Chuck Comiskey running the whole thing. And it was Comiskey for whom Cameron actually screened that Xenogenesis footage. He got the job on the spot. Basically, he showed it this guy, hey, this is what I can do. Boom, you're hired. We need somebody who can do that. So they had a little model shop in a warehouse. That's where Cameron would be working, because he is specifically working on special effects here. And it was at that model shop that he first met a young woman named Gail Ann Hurd. So Hurd was, at the time, she was Corman's assistant. Now, in Corman speak, assistant, that doesn't mean she was his secretary. As many jobs go on the set of a Corman film, you're doing a lot more than your title might indicate.
Oh yeah.
So she's She's making offers to agents. She's scouting locations. She's prepping marketing materials. And one part of her job was she would keep Corman up to date on his technical staff, which is what brought her to the New World Model Shop. She was there, kind of as Corman's liaison to see how things were going. She meets Cameron. He kind of, greets her at the door, and he gives her the grand tour of the model shop as if he's in charge of the place, despite the fact that he'd only been working there for a couple of days. This was a serendipitous meeting, the details of which we'll get into later on in our story, but Gale Anne Hurd is a big part of James Cameron's story, as we'll discuss. So when Cameron got hired onto this movie, most of the spaceships for Battle Beyond the Stars had already been designed, except for one, which was the hero ship. Because as you mentioned before, it does have a woman's voice, almost like the way that Star Trek, the computer has a woman's voice.
Oh yeah.
But she's a little less robot-y. I don't know.
She's even sassy. So she's got her own attitude and everything.
So anyway, they needed the spaceship. So Corman, he held basically an art contest, design contest between all of his staff. Remember, James Cameron always wins these contests when he's growing up, so he easily won. And all of a sudden, he was in charge of designing and building the film's main spaceship on his first job on a movie ever.
His basic suggestion, by the way, was that since it had a woman's voice, he was like, "Why don't we give the ship tits?" That was the thing.
Well, when Corman was looking at all the paintings that all the different designers had come up with, he comes up to Cameron's and he's like, "What is this?" And Cameron says, "It's a spaceship with tits." He says, "All right, I love it. Let's do it." And if you look at it, if you watch this movie, it 100% is a spaceship with tits. I mean, that's what it looks like. The bottom of the ship have these two round things that practically make no sense at all, but it got him the job,
Hey.
So
certain angles, it also looks like that dude from Star Wars who says, "It's a trap."
Yeah, I guess it kind of does. Upside down, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So Cameron, as we've already said, was a natural leader, and
Does that know what tits look like?
I think you're thinking of the devil from Little Nicky is what you're thinking of. Not the devil, but the demon guy with the tits on his head. So where was I? So as we've said, Cameron's kind of a natural leader. So when he gets this job, he's given that the opportunity to be in charge of something. That kind of emboldens him because Cameron, we're going to say a lot about him as a person throughout this series, some good, some bad, but he is confident, I think we can say. So the next time he sees Corman, remember, he's still the new guy. He explains to Corman that there's a fatal flaw that he had discovered in the production. He's looking over everything, how they're going to be doing this scene and this scene. He's like, there's no way to really put the actors inside of their model environment because they're building models for, the alien planets and things like that. There's no way to have your actors within that miniature environment in a realistic way. But Cameron had a solution. And this solution is one that goes back to all of his time studying Kubrick's 2001. It's a technique called front projection. So remember, he had spent his youth kind of obsessively reading up on the making of that film. And he had spent the last decade, it's been about a decade since he saw that movie, trying to figure out how Kubrick pulled off the trick of putting his actors into the film's environments. Because the way it looked was not like they don't look like they're on like a set, like a Star Wars set that very clearly looks like a set, or a Star Trek set is really what I should say. Like the OG Star Trek, they're charming, but you can tell that they're on a set that's made to look like a planet. Kubrick's doing something else. So if you're not familiar with the technique of front projection, you guys probably know what rear projection is. Rear projection, I mean, it's still it gets used on the Terminator, but rear projection is basically you've got your actors in front of the screen. There's been footage shot that is projected from the back of the screen. Pretty easy, right? They're standing in front of a projection. Front projection is a little bit differently. Front projection, they're still standing in front of a screen, but the footage is actually projected onto the actors and the screen. So it's coming from the front, from where the cameras are, right? Or actually from a projector near the cameras. And the way that they do it is the screen, they're usually using Scotch light or something like that, which is like this highly reflective material. It's what movie screens are made out of. Has little tiny minuscule microscopic bits of glass in it that make it highly, highly reflective. So they're projecting this footage onto the actor and the screen, but it's kind of a dim projection. So you don't see it on the actor, but the screen is so highly reflective that it basically the light bounces off of that screen and back into the camera. So that's how he pulled that off. That's how Kubrick pulled that off. So he brings this technique to Roger Corman. And all of a sudden, Cameron finds himself in charge of something else. New World Pictures' brand new front screen projection department that they created just for this movie.
Nice.
So already he's been working in the film business professionally for a few weeks, and already he's been given 2 promotions.
That's awesome. And I think the big thing here to take away, if we do happen to have any younger listeners out there, who want to pursue this crazy dream of the entertainment industry, I think the big takeaway from this is don't wait for permission. Just go ahead and jump in and do what you can to make that
as long as it's legal
for you. Yeah, as long as it's legal.
Although they picked up some shots on the Terminator without a permit, the guerrilla style. So
right.
As long as you're not hurting anybody in this.
Exactly. Exactly.
So anyway, it wouldn't be long before Gail Ann Hurd was also promoted. She's now not only Roger Corman's assistant, but she is the film's assistant production manager. So she's been given a lot more responsibility as well. And she noticed that the film's art director was moving awfully slow. They had hired somebody at the suggestion of, Warner Brothers or somebody. They had hired this veteran art director. Well, this veteran art director is not used to working on a Roger Corman time frame. So he's going very slow for the type of movie that they're making. Roger Corman movies are made quick. They got to get these out and cash in before people stop caring about a Star Wars ripoff, right?
Right.
So Gail Ann Hurd notices they're going kind of slow. Things aren't getting done. Sets aren't getting built as quickly as they need to be. And the guy gets fired. And guess who gets the job? Promotion number 3.
Okay.
Promotion number 3 for James Cameron. So he's moving up the ladder pretty quickly for a guy who has literally no experience in the business.
He's just got the right mentality for it. I was reading an interview with him about this time period, and he talked about just, a quote, he said, I worked on Battle Beyond the Stars on everything from special effects to production design to a little bit of second unit to post-production as a matte artist. I had 5 credits on that movie. The advantage of working at this level in film is that you're not risking your whole career. You can roll the dice. You can put the pedal to the floor. You develop a gonzo mentality. Once you're within a more formal structure, you've got to back off from that and learn to delegate responsibility, but not here.
As you mentioned, after Battle Beyond the Stars, Cameron's bouncing around a bunch of other projects, working on special effects and designs, including, I think you mentioned it, but John Carpenter's Escape from New York. He did a lot of the special effects on that. That was a perfect project for his sensibilities, I think. His next project with Corman was 1981's Galaxy of Terror. So this was Corman's answer to Ridley Scott's Alien in much the same way that Battle Beyond the Stars was made to cash in on the success of Star Wars. As the production designer on Galaxy of Terror, one of Cameron's employees was a young Texan named Bill Paxton. Bill Paxton at the time was an aspiring actor. He was looking for a night job he could work because he wanted to keep his days open for auditions. He meets Cameron. Cameron immediately gives him a job because he's got a set that needs to be built. So Bill Paxton's first job on a film set is painting sets for James Cameron. But
awesome.
the two hit it off. Like they really hit it off. They became fast friends, lifelong friends. And of course, as we know, Paxton's going to pop up in almost everything that Cameron does after this.
Yeah.
Real quick, Gary, you had a chance to watch a couple of these movies, right? You watched Battle Beyond the Stars?
I watched all of them. Yeah. I was
Battle Beyond the Stars is pretty fun. I mean, it's goofy, but it looks surprisingly good for a cheap little $2 million Star Wars ripoff by Roger Corman.
Yeah, I was going to mention that eventually that we're skipping through these movies, and you got to kind of do that because there's so much to talk about. But these movies are actually kind of cool to watch. If you go back, I'd never even heard of Battle Beyond the Stars or Galaxy of Terror, honestly, before this. And Battle Beyond the Stars looks pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all right. It's cheesy, but it's a good looking movie and a fun, for somebody, especially our age, it's just like a fun little sci-fi movie. And Galaxy of Terrors actually got some wicked shit in it. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I mean, it falls apart towards the end. I mean, I don't think it's like some like great fantastic movie or anything necessarily, but it's you'd be surprised how good some of this stuff looks.
Yeah, I mean, Battle Beyond the Stars, like, it is very much like a cheap B movie, but a good B movie. Like, it's silly, it's goofy, it's corny, but it's got a lot of fun ideas. It was written by John Sayles, who, John Sayles would end up being an indie darling, as a writer director later on, but he started out making B movies. He wrote Alligator, which is one of his great early films. Jimmy T. Murakami was the credited director on Battle Beyond the Stars, although Roger Corman did some stuff on it too. But Murakami was one of actually the animation directors on Heavy Metal.
Okay.
He did the wraparound piece where the car lands, he directed that part.
Cool.
But you've got John Saxon in there. John Saxon, anytime John Saxon shows up in one of these movies, it's always a good time. He's a lot of fun. He's basically the Darth Vader character essentially, but Sybil Danning, just like B movie royalty in this movie. And the guy who played John Boy Walton in the Waltons is your Luke Skywalker type character. But it's a fun movie. I mean, it's I think I watched it on Tubi or Amazon Prime or something. It's very easy to find. So if you want to really get into early James Cameron stuff, check it out. But pay special attention to the special effects, because they do look really good for a sci-fi movie of that budget. So Galaxy of Terror, moving back onto that, James Cameron, as he does, he pushes himself into positions of power, not like aggressively, just like, I know I can do this job better than other people. He's, like I said, very confident. So on Galaxy of Terror, he convinced Corman that he should be the film's second unit director. Corman agreed on the spot, which officially began James Cameron's career as a film director. That was the first thing I think he did a couple of second unit shots on Battle Beyond the Stars, but he wasn't credited. He's credited as a second unit director on Galaxy of Terror.
Yeah, and kind of that quote I gave earlier, like he kind of had, like he says that he had enough of the way things were being lit. In this one, he was kind of getting frustrated with that. He felt like the crew wasn't getting enough footage. So he convinced Corman and then started shooting all kinds of cool stuff. Arguably some of the most cool shit in the movie.
Yeah, a lot of the like gross stuff. There's a great story about him doing an effect with mealworms. Did you read about that, Gary?
Yeah, I mean it's the scene where Sid Haig, I mean,
where his arm gets
watching
chopped
this, yeah, and I was
or
like,
he chops his own arm off, I believe.
I was like, within like a certain span of time, Sid Haig's severed arm throws a crystal ninja star into his own chest, and then a woman gets raped by a giant 20-foot worm or something.
Yeah,
I was like, this movie's pretty wild, but
it is wild.
They discover Sid Haig's severed arm, and it's got worms all over it, and it's supposed to be like rotting basically. But when they were filming it, nothing was happening with the worms. So he finally got mealworms, thinking that they would do better, but it still didn't do it. But he came up with this idea of basically like running like an electrical wire or something underneath it, and it would send like a little electrical current into the prosthetic arm.
Well, they ended up using they ended up having to use like a goo, like some sort of goo to get the electricity to run through it, I think. So they had to put the goo on top of the worms.
But it made them start bouncing around. So it looks good when they find the Sid Haig's dead arm.
Yeah, because they it was supposed to be maggots. You can't just go find maggots. So he had to buy mealworms, and they found out that mealworms, when you put them on something, just kind of lay there. So he needed them wriggling around. So he figured out a way to do it. I mean, that was his job as a special effects director on it. Galaxy of Terror, though, is fucking awesome. I'm just going to say it is awesome. It is very much a cheesy B movie, but it is super fun. It's super weird. Like Gary said, it's got Sid Haig in it. It's got Robert Englund in it. It's got Erin Moran, who, Joni Loves Chachi. She played Joni on that. She's the main kind of girl on it. I don't know. I thought it was really fun. I had never seen it before. I'd heard of it only in the context of this is a movie that James Cameron worked on when he was young. But I didn't really know anything else about it. And I was highly entertained by it because it is a blast. It is super.
Sounds like those two would make a decent double header.
They would
for perhaps a live event.
Maybe. So anyway, while Cameron is working on some special effects shots for the film, in fact, specifically the one we were just talking about with the mealworms, while he's working on that, these two producers arrive on set. These guys are working on a sequel to Piranha, which is the cult hit that Corman had produced that had been directed by Joe Dante very early in his career. Someone had suggested Cameron as their special effects supervisor. So they were coming by to meet him, get to know this guy, see if this is the guy they wanted for the job. And they show up as he's doing this effect. And to them, what it looks like is that this guy is able to direct worms to wiggle on cue because he's turning on the current of that electricity, get them to wiggle. We hit cut, turn off the current, and they stop. They're like, if this guy can direct worms, then he should probably be able to handle some actors. So one of the producers, one of these guys who walks in is a guy named Ovidio Asanitis. I'm assuming I'm saying that right. I don't know if I said it wrong. I don't care because this guy seems like kind of a dick. So if he's offended, if he's still alive, I don't care. Anyway, he's an Italian producer who had a penchant for firing directors a few days into shooting so that he could take over the productions himself, because he's getting a lot of his funding from American studios like Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was supposed to actually originally, I believe, distribute Piranha 2, and it was easier for him to get funding, I think, if he hired an American director, because they were worried about translation issues and things like that, so he could never get hired as a director. So what he would do is he would hire a director, find a reason to fire them, and then take over the production and direct the rest of it himself, even though he's never credited as the director on them. So Cameron, of course, didn't know any of this at the time, though he would soon learn. Piranha 2 actually had another guy directing it originally, because remember, Cameron's being approached to be the special effects supervisor on it. The original director was a guy named Miller Drake, who had left the project over creative differences with Asanitis, after which Cameron was given the job. Miller Drake, by the way, I looked this guy up, so I'm like, I wonder if he ever bounced back and had a career. Well, he had a long career after this as a visual effects editor on everything from Cliffhanger to Batman and Forever to Fast and Furious. But his first credit as a visual effects editor came in 1989, and the film was James Cameron's The Abyss.
Nice.
And then he worked again with Cameron on Terminator 2 and True Lies. So I wonder if they had some Piranha 2 stories that they were bouncing back and forth on the sets of those.
I'm sure oh gosh, that would be to be a fly on the wall for those conversations.
From all reports, the shoot for Piranha 2, which officially is called Piranha 2: The Spawning, was a chaotic one. No sets had been built when Cameron arrived. They're in Jamaica. This is where they're shooting. No sets had been built. No locations had been secured. One scene, once Cameron got there and secured some of the sets and some locations, one of the scenes had to be shot in an actual morgue. There's a scene where the hero, the woman, and her like boyfriend guy have to go look at a body that's been devoured by piranhas. So they had to break into a morgue. Well, they had to use an actual morgue. They didn't know at the time that when they went in that it was a working morgue and there were bodies just laying out. So Cameron saw this. He's like, I've got cast and crew coming in here. We got to get this body out of here. Well, they couldn't move the body. So they just built a wall out of plywood, painted it, and covered the body up. So while the actors were working in the scene, there's what looks like a wall behind them, and it's actually just there's a dead body on the other end of that.
Oh, that's so funny.
It's pretty funny. But Cameron, he was never allowed to see the dailies of the footage that he had shot. He had very little control over what was going on. And by the 5th day of shooting, he was fired by Asanitis. I'm not sure what the reasoning, like what precedent he used to fire him, like what the reason he gave him for firing him was. I couldn't find that, but he gets fired basically so this guy can take over as the director himself. He directed the rest of the movie on his own. Yeah. Did you watch Piranha 2, Gary?
I did. It starts off fun, but it's
pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
There's some like crazy things to think about that go on in the movie, but
well, it starts off with a lot of like underwater footage. I'm like, well, this is very James Cameron of you. A lot of scuba diving at the beginning of the movie.
It's kind of sad because while in some interviews Cameron can come across as snobby, there's an air of like vulnerability to him sometimes as well. You can tell in some early interviews he worries about being perceived as good enough to do this stuff. And the Piranha thing was a huge blow to this because within so many films, he moved into this position. Now he's the director of the film, but then immediately he gets fired.
which makes him kind of wonder, do I have what it takes to be a director?
Yeah, exactly. He flies out to Rome, and he wants to confront the whole situation and see if he can find out where it all went wrong. And it turns out, in reality, a sonetist or whatever his name is, it was kind of what you just said. I mean, he got to see some of the dailies that he had never gotten to see before, and it turns out it works fine what he's shooting, but a sonetist couldn't get the budget for the movie without hiring an American director. So when
that's kind of what I was saying. That's kind of something he did his whole career.
Yeah. So, but he just really, it was just that he did just want to direct the movie himself. So he was looking for somebody that
a patsy
that he could just fire and have an excuse and then take over.
Yeah, I think his excuse on this was that, the footage isn't working. We can't cut it together to make it look good, which Cameron later found out was bullshit.
Exactly.
So yeah, like you said, he flies out to Rome. He has very little money at this time. He was supposed to be paid $10,000 for Piranha 2. He was supposed to get half of it up front, half of it when he completed the movie. Well, I'm sure when the producer hired him, he knew he was going to fire him and would only have to pay him $5,000 because that's all that he got paid. So he used what little money he had left to fly out to Rome, where Astonitis or a sonetist or whatever his name is, he's in post-production on the film. He talks the producer into showing him a rough cut, like Gary said, and not just dailies, but an actual rough cut of the film. And he sees that the footage that he shot does work really well. He also sees that this guy had completely reworked the film into absolute schlock, even by B-movie standards. Like, he hires penthouse pets for scenes just so that he can have women on screen with their tits out, and for no good reason other than he wanted to see it, I guess. So the movie is it's bad. It's a bad movie. There's no defending really Piranha 2, and you can't even defend it as like an early example of James Cameron learning his craft. You could do that with Galaxy of Terror. I think you could even maybe do it with Battle Beyond the Stars, even though he didn't direct those. But on this, other than like what I think is a very coincidental inclusion of some underwater footage and scuba diving and things like that, this is not a James Cameron movie. It does not have any of his fingerprints on it at all. It is his it does have his name on it, but that was a legality thing because he didn't have the money to take them to court to get his name off of it. Basically, is where it fell.
Yeah, the OG was a Jaws ripoff, the OG Piranha movie, but this one takes it to another level. It's literally just copying scenes.
And the original one was Joe Dante getting to make a Joe Dante movie, and the first Piranha is a fucking blast. It's a great of all the Jaws ripoffs, it's probably the best. I mean, it is the best.
Apparently, like, snuck into the editing bay and recut a lot of the movie himself.
That got recut again, I believe, before release, though.
He said obviously it wasn't changing much. He was saying, like, literally, I think he says, because it wasn't like I saw Citizen Kane in this thing, but it let me see that what I was shooting was okay, and my faith was kind of restored. But that if the only movie that has my name on it is a piece of trash, then getting my next job is going to be really difficult.
Right.
And so, hey, what can you learn from this? The guy's clearly always thinking about the future.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is that the mentality when he took this job, I'm sure he wasn't dreaming of doing a sequel to Piranha. But the mentality when you came up working for Roger Corman, you get offered a job directing a movie, you take it and you do your best with it. And that worked out for a lot of directors. It worked out for Martin Scorsese. It worked out for Francis Ford Coppola. These guys all started working in their careers, early on in their careers, with Roger Corman, and they made some schlock. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola made Dementia 13. Then a few years later, he made The Godfather. They took the job. That was the mentality when you worked in the Roger Corman School of Film. So that's why he took the job immediately, not because, he just saw this as another step in his career that had been moving along at a pretty good pace. And unfortunately, the guy he was working for screwed him over. So when he's in Rome at this point, he flew over to Rome to mess around, to try to see what was going on with Piranha. He wanted to confront the situation, as we said. And the problem is, he had used all his money to get to Rome. He didn't have the money to get back. He would basically, he's staying at a hotel. He's living at a hotel, and he didn't even have the money to eat. He would steal scraps of food off of the room service carts. And that's how he was feeding himself. Like he was just, I mean, and James Cameron's already a pretty thin guy. So he's just like, getting thinner, not doing well. After a few days, his body just breaks down and he gets a fever, gets very sick. And it was while he had that fever that he has a dream. And in this fever dream, Gary, I don't know how you feel about this. This sounds like a legend that James Cameron is putting out there. I don't know how true this story actually is, but when the legend is this fun, I say print the legend. So this is that's where I'm going with this. And this comes from multiple accounts, but of course, all those accounts come from James Cameron telling this story. He's having a fever dream, and in this dream, he sees a chrome torso emerging from an explosion and dragging itself across the floor with kitchen knives in its hands. So he's got these knives that's pulling itself because it doesn't have legs. Its legs have been exploded or whatever. So he gets this really vivid image in his mind. And when he wakes up, he starts sketching this chrome figure onto hotel stationery. And as he's drawing this, ideas for a story about this image start flooding his mind. And this, of course, is the beginning of what would eventually become the Terminator. So when we talk about Piranha 2, and the reason we go through all these films, Galaxy of Terror, Battle Beyond the Stars, his experiences working for Roger Corman, his experiences getting screwed over on Piranha 2, this all leads to the Terminator. Like, you have to think, had he not been fired off of Piranha 2 and had to go confront the guy in Rome and had to start eating shit off of food carts in the hotel, would he have ever had the idea for Terminator? What would his career have looked like if he hadn't gone through all of this stuff?
Yeah, it's true.
It's interesting to think about. Like sometimes the shitty things happen that will honestly lead to better things.
The story, the legend about seeing the thing, I mean, it sounds like a fun thing. I saw one interview where like somebody like directly said, we've seen reports that you had an image of a skeletal metal robot emerging from fire. That was like the thing. I never see him like delve into it further than like seeing that. I mean, and then he goes into, yes, but when I was writing this is what I was thinking. He like tells a whole other story. So I don't know how much is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that even if he had that dream, it was probably subconsciously pulling from other ideas that he already had batting around in his brain. That's how ideas work. Piranha 2, by the way, would eventually be released. It was not released by Warner Brothers as originally expected. They passed on it, and it was released by a small company that was actually just a front for a porn distributor. And although, as I mentioned, for legal reasons, Cameron's name is still on the film, but he does not consider it part of his filmography. He considers The Terminator to be his first film, and I honestly agree with that because it sounds like he barely directed anything on Piranha 2. Now, if there is one positive thing that Cameron took from the Piranha 2 shoot, it was that's where he met Lance Henriksen. Lance Henriksen is one of the stars of Piranha 2. He's the Chief Brody character of the film. And the two would become close friends on set. And Henriksen would appear in several of Cameron's films afterwards. We'll talk about him a lot over the next few weeks, I'm sure. In fact, this is kind of a trend with Cameron. We discussed this about a lot of our directors, most recently David Cronenberg, how he takes his collaborators onto other projects with him. But Cameron started doing that with people that he worked with on films he didn't even direct. Battle Beyond the Stars, Galaxy of Terror. If you go and you look at a lot of the crew members on these, especially folks in the technical and the special effects departments, you'll see a lot of them end up working in similar roles on Cameron's own films. All very far into his career. You can see people from like Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror working on Avatar, decades later. I mean, the score for Battle Beyond the Stars was composed by James Horner. Very early in his career, James Horner, of course, would go on to work with Cameron years later on Titanic, for which he won an Oscar, and on Avatar. Nice. And he met him through a film that he didn't even direct.
How about that? He is loyal.
He is.
To be fair, I appreciate that he saw something in Lance Henriksen, and I love Lance Henriksen. And I feel like on this show so far, it sounds like I've only talked shit about Lance Henriksen.
Lance Henriksen is great.
But I play with Lance Henriksen, but he's Chief Brody. If Chief Brody refused to tuck in his shirt, smoked 2 packs a day, and had like left his wife because he was on like 2-week bender.
Yeah. A much more interesting Chief Brody is what you mean.
Yeah.
He's Chief Brody in that he is a police officer in this area.
Hunting killer fish. Right. He's pretty great at it. He's one of the few bright points of
he's still 100% Lance Henriksen, so he makes the thing watchable.
I think he had it in his contract that, hey, I will not comb my hair. What little hair I have left does not get combed
or get a haircut. He's like, no, I'm hanging out on the beach for this whole shoot. I'm on vacation. This is what we're doing.
So with a little bit of help from his father, who gave him a loan, Cameron makes his way back to California. He's energized by this new story idea. He goes actually his friend Randall Frakes. Remember the guy that they made Xenogenesis together? He's sleeping on Frakes' house, on his floor in his house.
On his house.
On his house.
Snoopy.
On the roof. Yep. He's sleeping on the floor of his house. And it was there that he starts working on the treatment for the Terminator. And remember, Cameron's not like a screenwriter, really. He didn't really even know how to format a screenplay. So when it was time to turn the treatment into a script, he contacted his friend Bill Wisher, the other guy that made Xenogenesis with him. He wanted help turning this into a screenplay, but he also wanted somebody that he could kind of bounce ideas off of. Bill Wisher doesn't have any writing credit on the Terminator, but he did actually help construct several scenes in the early parts of the film, like some of Sarah Connor's early stuff and the police station scene, which is a major set piece in the film. Bill Wisher actually helped to construct that as well. I'm not sure why he didn't get any writing credit on it, though, unless the ideas were so reworked or it was some agreement he had with Cameron. I'm not really sure.
This really allowed Cameron to get back into a science fiction thing. This was his first experiment with, like, I have an idea for something where I can talk about something I'm passionate about, but do it in the science fiction setting of like what we talked about earlier, where he's like, these guys have a better idea of what life's really about than the day-to-day people.
Well, I think that's something we talked about a lot back in our Starship Troopers episode, and even in our RoboCop episode when we were covering Paul Verhoeven, is that sci-fi is a really good way to hide ideas behind like sci-fi, a visage of sci-fi, and Starship Troopers especially. Of course, we know we mentioned earlier one of the sci-fi writers that Cameron grew up reading was Robert Heinlein, who wrote Starship Troopers.
I always feel like you can get away with this in science fiction, and then maybe next is horror. And Terminator is definitely a mixture of both of those things.
For sure. So at this time in his career, Cameron had an agent, thanks to getting hired on Piranha that helped him get an agent. When he showed his agent the idea for Terminator, the agent hated it. He thought it was trash. He told him to get rid of it. He said it was a lousy idea. You should forget it and focus on something else. So what does James Cameron do? He fires his agent, which is an extraordinarily dangerous move for a guy with no money and no job prospects.
Yeah.
But this is also the first of many, many times that James Cameron would be doubted by the Hollywood establishment, and the first of many times that Cameron forged ahead either out of recklessness or extreme confidence in his own abilities, and one of the first of many times that it paid off for him.
Yeah, this is going to be his...
This is MO for the rest of his career.
Pays to be ballsy, like most of us will never, I don't know. You get so caught up in like, I can't lose this job. And Cameron's like, nah, fuck this job, man. Like, I'll say what I want to say and we'll see what happens. And I guess he's got enough talent to back it up.
So Cameron was able to find someone else who had passion for this project, and that was Gale Ann Hurd, Roger Corman's former assistant, who had worked with Cameron on Battle Beyond the Stars and was responsible for Cameron getting his first promotion on that project. So the two decided, she read the script, she liked it, she saw its potential. So they wanted to shop this around, try to get funding for it. And the two decided to present themselves as a directing and producing team to potential investors. Cameron actually sold the rights to the Terminator for $1 to Hurd. $1 in return for a blood oath that she would produce the film only if he directed, or would not get made. Basically, if the investors aren't down with him directing the project, then they're going to pass on it. They're not going to make it. They're only that was their agreement. To her credit, Heard stood by Cameron's side. The first thing that a lot of these potential investors did was to try to edge Cameron out and hire someone else as a director, but Heard was determined to keep her promise. And she did. She did not bow to any of these investors who wanted to get rid of Cameron. She was not going to make this movie if Cameron wasn't the director. It should be noted, though, that because of this deal, remember, he legally sold the rights to Gale Anne Hurd. So he no longer owned any rights to the Terminator or its characters or anything else involved. Anything else is Terminator related that he wasn't directly involved in, like Terminator 3, Terminator Salvation, which he didn't direct or produce, theme park rides, action figures, video games, toys. You know, he didn't make a dime off of any of that. Because
this is where George Lucas one-upped him, I guess.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. He didn't make a dime off of any of that. Now, he got obviously directing fees like when he did Terminator 2, but anything else that's Terminator related, unless he's on it as a director or producer, he's not making any money off of it.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
Because it's still just like this lingering thing out there that Terminator, just for whatever reason, I think we talked about this on the preview episode for this one, that just like Terminator just continues to persist, just like the Terminator itself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think Cameron was the producer or executive producer on the most recent one. What was the most recent one? Dark Fate.
Dark
I think
Fate.
he was the producer on that. So at least he's getting some money off of that one. You know, not that he's doing fine financially.
Yeah. Cameron's
He's all set.
We're not worried about him. Also, if you watch the Terminator during those opening credits, which are incredible opening credits, by the way, I rewatched the movie this morning and I rewound the credits because I wanted to watch them again because they're so cool. But you'll notice that the screenplay is credited to James Cameron with Gale Anne Hurd. But according to Cameron, she never actually wrote anything on the script. She would give suggestions. That's part of the producer's job, is to give suggestions on the script and the storytelling, but she never did any actual writing, and they only included her as a co-screenwriter as kind of part of their team-based sales pitch because she had a little bit more experience than him, and they thought that might help them with potential investors.
Statement on that basically just says that he had written the treatment, most of the first draft already, and then she became involved in just kind of polishing things up. He says the initial idea was his, the collaboration was that she was there to kind of take some of the rough edges off. He definitely says the strength for both of them is that they were pooling their resources together and forming what he calls an impenetrable barrier to anybody who wanted to take it away from us or change the concept. He says, quote, "It's always a fight to preserve your vision against the vision of others. If you have 5 people working as producers, you get 5 completely different concepts of what the story is really about. And often they're completely irreconcilable. You have to fall back on your own instinct. Sometimes the toughest thing to do is to trust yourself. You might not find that possible in a collaboration if it wasn't a relationship with someone you'd worked with before and you knew. We've been very fortunate with the support of Hemdale and Orion, which financed and distributed the film, since we didn't have much of a track record. We had directed and produced before, but not on the scale of Terminator. But both companies had high hopes for us and the picture. And there were some times in the early stages where we did think that they would try to scoop it out from beneath us. But I guess because it was both of them, he basically says nobody ever tried anything. It was just like they got exactly what they wanted.
Yeah, and based on the strength of their pitch, they were able to secure distribution through Orion Pictures. Orion did not finance it. Orion was going to get it into theaters. It probably helped that Orion, if you look into the history of Orion Pictures, its origins lie with folks who had worked under Roger Corman in the past, so they had some connections there. Orion, though, they said that they're like, yeah, we'll distribute the film if Cameron and Hurd can get financing somewhere else. That financing would come in the form of a guy named John Daly and Hemdale Pictures, who you mentioned. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you might recognize the name Hemdale, might sound a little bit familiar to you. This was the production company that was founded by John Daly and David Hemmings. David Hemmings is the British actor that is the star of Dario Argento's Deep Red. Hemdale We mentioned it previously on an episode because they also produced Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. They were actually working on these around the same time when they were kind of finishing things up on the Terminator when they started working on Return of the Living Dead. So they're responsible for getting both of those movies into theaters. So John Daly was pretty intrigued by Cameron's script. He was especially intrigued that they had already secured finance or distribution, because usually you get financing and then your next hurdle is to find somebody to distribute the film. They already had that part set up, so that's in their favor. When Cameron went in to pitch it to him, he knew, he's like, I really want to nail this. I want to sell them on this pitch. One thing that I'm learning reading about James Cameron is he is a hell of a pitch man. Like, the guy knows how to walk into a studio, walk into a financer. And I mean, that's what he was doing with Roger Corman, getting those promotions. He's like, this is what we should do. He's pitching himself to Roger Corman basically. And he's doing the same thing here. He knows how to convince people.
I think it's because he's legitimately that passionate about everything that he does. Like he really believes in it. Like, I mean, the entire time, like if you're digging into anything you can find on the Terminator, I mean, anytime he talks about it, still, like, I don't know why he doesn't do a fucking commentary on a Blu-ray, but anytime he still talks about the Terminator, just like the initial stuff for it, he still cares about it. Like, you could tell like what his mindset was at the time when I was talking about like the robot coming out of the fire and stuff like that. He was talking about like, he just envisioned this robot, like the way it would look, the endoskeleton. Nothing had ever been filmed that way before. He was thinking about things like Westworld that he loved so much as a kid, and like Yul Brynner's face comes off and there's a transistor radio underneath it. And he was like, what could that look like? All the way. And he said he's not very visually satisfying because you get the idea of what it is, but what's inside that making the facial features move. Yeah. So he's like, I wanted to make like the definitive movie robot, like in a way nobody's ever seen one before. Like, he just gets excited about it.
Yeah, he does. So when he's going to pitch this to Hemdale, to John Daly specifically, like I said, he wanted this pitch to be it. He didn't want to have to come back. He wants this pitch to seal the deal. So here's his idea. He has his buddy Lance Henriksen. Remember, they've become friends. And Lance Henriksen obviously is an actor. He has Lance Henriksen show up to the meeting early at Hemdale's offices. He's dressed as the Terminator. He kicks in the door to John Daly's office. He's wearing a ripped t-shirt, a leather jacket, knee-high leather boots. He's got gold foil from, I think, like a cigarette pack. He's worked around his teeth to make it look like his teeth are made of metal. He's got special effects cuts painted on his face. So he's like a damaged Terminator. He kicks in John Daly's office, scares the shit out of Daly's poor receptionist. And then he just sits there in the waiting room, staring. Not moving for like 15 minutes. He's like sitting there for like 15 minutes until James Cameron shows up. And that was how the pitch started. Wow. Cameron comes in, he makes his pitch. He shows some sketches of scenes from the screenplay. I mean, as we've mentioned several times, Cameron's a very accomplished artist. So that does very much help him on a pitch, that he can show visually, this is what it's going to look like. And Daly was so impressed with his passion and with what he was showing him that he agreed to back the film's budget of about $6 million. They've got their budget. They've got their screenplay. They're ready to go. But of course, we've got to find an actor to play the film's hero. That's how these things work. So the hero in this case being Kyle Reese. Orion, they really wanted a rising star, but they also wanted someone that had a lot of appeal overseas. Mike Medavoy, who is the studio's co-founder, he had recently met a young man named Arnold Schwarzenegger. I say young. I mean, I think Schwarzenegger's in his mid-30s at this point, so he's not like a 20-year-old, no experience kind of guy. He's already had a full career as a bodybuilder at this point. But he had met Arnold Schwarzenegger at a party, and he sent his agent the script with the lead role in mind. Schwarzenegger at this time was a 5-time Mr. Universe, a 7-time Mr. Olympia. He was already a legend in the world of bodybuilding. And by 1982, when all this is going around, this is a couple years before the movie came out, 1982, he'd already been in Hollywood for over a decade. His first screen credit was Hercules in New York, where his heavily accented voice is overdubbed and he's credited as Arnold Strong. It is very bad. If you've never seen Hercules in New York, it is
It's tough when it's like not even his real voice.
Yeah, it's very bad. He had also had some small roles in films like Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye, Bob Rafelson's Stay Hungry, which was probably his first like real like role where his character had like a name. It was in the 1977 documentary Pumping Iron, however, that was what actually made him a star, a documentary about him and his bodybuilding. And that led to his lead role in John Milius's Conan the Barbarian.
Mhm.
I'm not going to get too far into Schwarzenegger's background beyond what I just said, because we're already going to go long talking about James Cameron's background. Maybe we'll get into more about Schwarzenegger when we do like a John Milius series or sometime when we talk about Conan down the line or something.
There is a great interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the Tim Ferriss podcast for anybody who really wants to know what that guy's like. It's some reason they get into a lot of him first coming to the country and what they did. And that guy was always, it's not just that he looked good. That guy has always been driven and smart.
Yeah.
Like, probably why him and Cameron get along so well.
Yeah.
They're very similar in that way.
Yeah. He just like, I mean, from being a bricklayer to becoming an actor and a bodybuilder and like, just like, I mean, the guy just knew what he wanted and he went for it. And so,
well, I know I've heard stories of Schwarzenegger when he was, a kid in Austria selling like sodas on the beach, like starting his own, like being a little entrepreneur when he's a child, like he's been driven his entire life.
He straight up tells stories about his friend, Frank, God, I can't think of the guy's name. He's in Pumping Iron with him, but also a professional bodybuilder. Like just that when they first came to LA, like they said when they met and they became best friends and stuff, and they're both just like these guys that just are driven to make something of themselves. And this guy's like now I think the most famous chiropractor around LA and stuff like that. But he talks about they became like bricklayers, like they were like literally like they realized there was a market because people thought for some reason building the way things were built in Sweden were like somehow more special than the way things were being built in American. Like, oh, we could do this like Swedish style, or we could do this German style. And like, you could add that to like something when you're just like putting together something for someone in Los Angeles, and they'll be like, oh shit. Yeah. Like, that's what I want. Like, I got to have that style of thing. So they would go and they would like, he would just get bodybuilders from the gym he was in who had no experience whatsoever. And he straight up tells this story about like, they would just go to houses. Like he would pitch to the people like, oh, I'd love to build this thing for you. It'll be this much money, but it'll be worth it. It's totally German style. You'll love it. It'll be so great. And they're like,
the accent probably helped.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, how much? And he's like, oh, it's gonna cost like $12,000, but we'll build this thing for you. And they're like, oh man, I don't know, and blah blah blah. Then he'd go like, he said it was like a workout thing. Like he would go to his buddy, and then his buddy would talk in German back to him, and like basically be yelling and screaming nonsense in German. And then he would come in. He's like, my friend is very upset about this thing. He says that, I don't know. He was like, you're fucking stupid for saying that you would only pay this much. But I talk it down to like $10,000 instead of $12,000. And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And that's like how he made his money. Like he's that kind of guy. Yeah. Like he always has been. And he talks about like how much money they made. Like, even if he had not become an actor, like how much money they were raking in just from his hustle with building shit.
I think he also like he's very driven, but also like knows himself as a commodity, if that makes sense. Like he knows his strengths. He knows he's very charismatic. That's why he was the guy talking to people, right. But he's just got a really good mind for it. And he always has his entire career. So when they get sent the script for the Terminator, Arnold's agents think, they're like, oh, we want you to look at this for the lead role. And they're, of course, thinking lead role is Kyle Reese. Cameron, however, was kind of skeptical about him playing Kyle Reese because Arnold is enormous. And he knew that Cameron knew that if I cast this guy as Kyle Reese, I'm going to have to find someone even bigger to play the Terminator if he's going to be a worthy adversary. Mm-hmm. The studio famously wanted O.J. Simpson as the Terminator, but Cameron, he's like, I have a hard time seeing that. That guy's really likable. I have a hard time seeing him as like a believable killing machine.
He wouldn't kill anybody.
And hold for laugh.
But truthfully, O.J. Simpson, he would be hard to see as an emotionless killing machine. Then, which is what the Terminator needs to be. Cameron, though, he agreed to meet with Arnold kind of as a courtesy to the studio, but he had planned on kind of sabotaging it. His plan was we're going to go to lunch. He's going to pick a fight with Schwarzenegger, and then he's going to be able to go back to Himdall and tell him this Schwarzenegger guy's an asshole. I don't want to work with him. And then we'll move on to the next guy on the list. But it didn't work out that way because Schwarzenegger was so entertaining and so excited about the script that Cameron couldn't help but like him. They clicked like immediately. And even though Schwarzenegger's agents wanted him to go for the role of Reese, they wanted him to play a good guy. He kept talking about how the villain should be played. He kept saying, like, you know, he's a robot. He should move like this. He should move in a way that's not human. Like, he was very passionate about how he felt that the Terminator should be played, even though he was supposed to be trying to get the other job. And Cameron's like watching him the whole time. He's looking at Arnold, looking at not just like how big and muscular as he is, but like how angular his face is. You know, Arnold's got a very striking face, especially around this time where he's got these like sharp cheekbones, this big jaw line. Like he looks almost like a robot. So Cameron's watching him and listening to him passionately talk about the Terminator character. And he's like thinking, this guy would make a really great Terminator, man. I don't know about Kyle Reese, but he'd make a hell of a Terminator. So he takes this idea back to his studio and kind of pitches them on it. And then by the next day, Schwarzenegger signing the contract to play the Terminator.
Wow.
Yeah. He says, quote, he and I met and neither of us felt really comfortable about him in that part. It had never occurred to anyone that he considered playing a villain. But as we talked more and more, it started to become apparent that that's really the role he wanted. Now, Arnold is a shaven-headed, eyebrowless, half man, half machine in a black leather jacket with wraparound sunglasses. It does break the mold of what people think about him. And Arnold has to eventually work himself to a point where he realizes he can do what he wants as an actor and that he starts to become willing to take chances. He talks about that he thinks that, like, even as the movie gets pitched, like, people just don't know what to expect from like Arnold Schwarzenegger in this movie. And they know that that's going to be an issue, that they're like thinking this is going to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dirty Harry, basically. Right. And they're going to be taking on a whole different ride.
Well, Arnold's not like a movie star quite at this point. He had gotten some fame from Pumping Iron, and then Conan was edging him towards being a movie star, but he wasn't like what we think of Arnold Schwarzenegger as now, you know. So there were expectations on him, but not like there would be, you know, well on into his career.
When he was he said he talked about like Orion was really interested in like, oh, we get this guy and the poster can be Arnold with his chest bared, and you know, like something like that, and that'll drive women to want to come see this thing and that sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, but there's nothing sexual about this movie. Like, yeah, it's the, you know, at least especially for what we want Arnold to do now.
Yeah,
like, it's not going to be. He's a sexless, emotionless machine. Yeah. Like, it's
he probably doesn't even have a dick. What do you think? You think the Terminator has a dick?
Yeah.
Why would they?
And he says this. Well, he literally says like it's to me it made that even more scary because he's absolutely perfect in every way, but he's like a perfect male figure, but he does not. That's not even a focus for him.
He's like a fucking Ken doll down there.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Except he's not actually, because we see his dick in this movie, I think.
Yeah. No, he did
in
say,
his very first scene when he's walking naked towards the punks. That dong is swinging.
He said Cameron did say the initial impulse was to make a gritty street level science fiction movie that you would buy as if it were really happening. But once Arnold came into the picture, it became completely different from how he had originally envisioned it. He said, I thought of the Terminator as more of a anonymous saturnine figure. He mentions Jürgen Prochnow, which I'm not familiar with.
I don't know that. I don't know what words you just said.
He's like, that's who I had in mind.
Well, I know that he was looking at Lance Henriksen as a possible Terminator.
Well, yeah, we mentioned that, and he said, but when it was Arnold, it just took on this larger than life sheen to the whole thing.
Well, it had to.
Yeah, he said, I found myself on set doing things I didn't think that I'd ever do. Scenes that were supposed to be purely horrific that just now couldn't be anymore. There was like a flamboyance to some of the stuff we did.
Well, his idea for the Terminator when he was conceiving the movie was that the Terminator was supposed to be able to infiltrate into society unnoticed. Like he's supposed to blend in. Schwarzenegger's not one to blend in. Schwarzenegger is enormous. He looks like a superhero. So there's no way that he's going to blend in. So when they cast Arnold in the role, they kind of had to rethink how they were approaching this character almost, They also, other actors that they had looked at or that they had thought about before Arnold included Sylvester Stallone, which sounds like you'd be in the same boat as Arnold, but Sylvester Stallone in the early 80s was very different than Sylvester Stallone in the mid to late 80s, where he basically started becoming an Arnold Schwarzenegger type. Mel Gibson was another one that they looked at as well. And I think both of those would have been a little more believable as like regular dudes who could blend in, than Arnold. But Arnold has a lot of other aspects that I think essentially made this movie. I mean, Schwarzenegger does not look human, even in real life, especially in 1984 Arnold, when he was just
massive,
just massive.
Huge
That's why they could fucking CG him in like Terminator Salvation.
Right.
And you're still like, that still looks like Arnold.
Yeah, because he doesn't look human. I mean, I do think that casting Schwarzenegger in the role was still, despite the fact that it didn't fit their original concept for the character, it's still a brilliant bit of casting and is, I think, I think it's very likely that it helped to make the Terminator the hit that it was. I love Lance Henriksen. We've already talked about that. I think he's an awesome actor. He's one of the coolest character actors out there, but I'm not sure that we'd be still talking about the Terminator, at least in the way that we're talking about it, in the same way if anyone other than Arnold had been in that role.
Yeah, it's a special thing that like gets added to a movie that specifically in one of these interviews I read too, somebody brings up Dawn of the Dead and said it's like weird in the way that like Dawn of the Dead, like a lot of people start rooting for the zombie. James Cameron says, he's like, we started to learn that in this film you can have it both ways. You root for Reese and you root for Sarah. You want them to live, you feel their emotions. And at the same time, you start to really appreciate the bad guy. You want to see him keep getting up. You want to see him dumbfound the stupid cops. He said there's like, everybody's got this like little private fantasy world we'd all love to be in, and we'd love to shoot somebody we don't like. And we just every minute of the day, you get to have your own way. He's like the Terminator, like for some reason with Arnold, it takes on this whole life of its own and it becomes the ultimate rude person. He's just outside of societal constraints,
doing whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah, he's just this dark, cathartic fantasy where he's walking in. You don't cringe in terror anymore. Like for some reason in the Terminator, you start to go with him. Like you want to be with him for a moment and kick in a door where you're not supposed to go and like shoot some people you're not supposed to shoot. And then you get to go back to Kyle and Sarah and feel emotional and happy and feel like what it's like to be on the other side of that coming for you.
Well, the other advantage to casting Arnold is, remember, this is a $6 million movie. This is pretty low budget. And if you've only got a limited budget for special effects, why not cast a walking special effect as your star? Right. Because every time Arnold's on screen, but even before he gets the damage on his face and stuff like that, when he's just like regular Arnold walking around like the tech noir club and stuff like that, like he is a special effect just by existing. Mm-hmm. That's all you need is to put that guy on screen. You don't need anything else. You don't need CGI to make him look a certain way. He just looks that way.
Yep, that's just how he looks.
You think of Bill Paxton and his two buddies that are hanging out at the telescope or whatever, and they're just like, what's wrong with this picture? And they're like looking at him. I don't know. They get like pretty violent with him early on, but me, I'd kind of be like, I feel like I'd kind of be like, Jesus, dude. Like, what are you doing? I don't know. I'd be a little more enthralled with what was happening, not in a sexual
because
way
of his dog.
Yeah, I was
going to say not in a sexual way necessarily. Just that you'd have to appreciate, like, look at this fucking guy who's and honestly, this time watching it, I was kind of thinking, you know what? If I looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'd walk around naked most of the time too. I just wouldn't give a shit.
Would you just wait in a room like crouched down so that when they open the door you just slowly stand up?
Yeah, probably, because that's the thing. I mean, listen, I'm not going to justify anything, but Arnold's been through his stuff in the past too and everything, and but I just feel like Arnold probably operates on a different playing field than most people. He probably does walk around with his dong out more than most people. Probably is just naked more, and it's probably uncomfortable for people. But it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you're like, well, if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe.
I mean, his first major job as a star was as a bodybuilder, where you're basically naked anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
You're probably just, I mean, he literally, if you watch the movie Pumping Iron, he talks about curling, he just building that pump is coming every time he works out.
That's the famous line from that.
Yeah. So it's this is a different guy.
Yeah. All right. So we've got the Terminator himself. He's cast. We got that. That's important because that's the name of the movie. But that still leaves the role of Kyle Reese vacant, because remember, they wanted Arnold for Kyle Reese initially. So they got to find a guy to play Kyle Reese. Actors who were considered included Sting, not the wrestler, I don't think. I think that the actor, Matt Dillon, Kurt Russell, which I could definitely see, Tommy Lee Jones, which is odd, and Bruce Springsteen.
All right.
I mean, I got nothing against Bruce Springsteen. I just
he's the boss.
I don't know why.
I don't.
He's got that. He definitely has that look of just that weather beaten. You could easily see him. If he told you he was a soldier, you'd be like, yeah, that tracks.
That's just what everyone from New Jersey looks like.
It's that example of stunt casting. Where
I think so too.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, well, you get the boss on here, so this movie's going to make money.
We'll get him on the soundtrack, and
okay, Gary, that's your assignment.
I was really trying to think.
I was literally sitting here just born as a Terminator.
I was definitely trying to think of the Weird Al version of Born to Run, but it's about killing.
So Born in the Apocalypse.
Oh yeah, but no, you're right. No, I think you're onto something. Born to Run, but it's
Born to Run is where I went.
But because you're being chased by a Terminator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cameron ultimately, as we know, chose Michael Biehn. Michael Biehn was 27 years old at the time. He had done some television work and a little bit of film. In fact, his first feature film role, his debut, was in 1978 in an uncredited role in Grease, which is something I did not know about Michael Biehn before researching this episode. But he was relatively unknown at the time that he got the job in the Terminator. When he first learned about the film, he kind of thought it sounded silly. But as soon as he met James Cameron, he changed his mind, because once again, James Cameron is very enthusiastic and very convincing. They didn't want Michael Biehn at first because when he did his audition, he had a Southern accent, and they're like, can he not do a Southern accent? Why is he doing that? I don't think we can cast him because his character's not supposed to be Southern. And Michael Biehn's agent was like, what are you talking about? He's not Southern. Turns out the day of his audition, he had also been auditioning, or he had, I think, been in the play. He had been in Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where he had to talk in a Southern accent. So he hadn't been able to drop the accent yet when he came in for his audition. So they had him come back, and he was able to audition in his regular voice.
This made him for the 80s. I love Michael Biehn. He seems like I
always thought he should be a bigger star than he became. I mean, he's continued to work steadily since the Terminator, but I just always felt like he should be more of a movie star, and he's been more relegated to B movies if he's the star, or supporting roles like in Tombstone.
I was gonna say, what's weird about him is that, especially as Kyle Reese, something about him makes him very likable to me, and I feel like he's just got a nice, likable face. He seems trustworthy. Yeah. But he is in roles like Tombstone, where you're like, oh, you're the bad guy.
Johnny Ringo is one of the best roles he ever did.
Yeah,
he's great.
but to be fair, sometimes what's cool is having those bad guys that are super charismatic like that.
And Johnny Ringo is.
Yeah,
you hate him as a person, but as a character, he is electric every time he's on screen in that movie. But yeah, I mean, the Reese
he's also
role
the dad in Cherry Falls, where it looks like he's
yeah.
like going to have some kind of sexual relationship with his daughter, but that's a whole other movie.
Yeah. So the Reese role, though, I think the Kyle Reese role is a difficult one. And I think that Michael Biehn pulls it off. But this character has to deliver a lot of exposition. Like he does it during a car chase. He does it in the middle of like gunfights. Like he's having to do it in the pauses of these action scenes is kind of the way that they constructed it.
Yeah.
And he's also got to make all this goofy, wacky time travel future war stuff sound believable, and it has to make sense to the audience because he's explaining all of this to Sarah Connor. He's explaining that I'm a soldier from the future and this guy's coming back to kill you because you're the father of the future. While they're being in a car being chased by the Terminator, like he's delivering all this dialogue. It's wild. But he's also got to seem simultaneously tough enough to take on the Terminator and sensitive enough to fall in love with Sarah Connor just by seeing a photograph of her, and likable enough for her to fall in love with him in just a very short span of time.
You spelled it out perfectly, but yeah, he's got to have that vulnerable side where he's just like sitting there with a shotgun, but like makes you want to rub his back.
Yeah.
Give him a massage and like, oh, you were looking at my photo for so long. I want to have sex with you.
Listen, I know that we may not make it out of this alive, but I know you did your best. That kind of thing.
Also, I mean, I guess, she asked him if there was ever, a woman.
Yeah, he is a virgin. She does take his virginity.
I was about to say, it also feels like she's just like, God, you're probably going to die here. And I feel terrible that you'll die a virgin. So
we got to do something about this. Also, I got stood up on a date earlier tonight, so I'm a little horny.
Yeah. Saddle up, cowboy.
Speaking of Sarah Connor, though, they've still got to get that role cast. For this role, Cameron had to find someone who could start the film as a sweet, regular girl. She's a waitress. She's kind of flustered. Her biggest concern is getting stood up on a date. That's kind of like the biggest thing in her life at the time. But by the end of the film, she's got to be making homemade bombs. She's got to be rallying an injured Kyle Reese to his feet. And she has to be able to convincingly deliver the line, "You're terminated, fucker." And do this within an hour and a half movie, an hour and 40-minute movie.
Yeah.
And that's another tough role. Cameron auditioned a bunch of actresses for the role. He had them come to Gala and Hurd's house, and they would run up and down the driveway so you could see how they looked fleeing the Terminator, because he knew there was going to be a lot of running in this movie. Some of the actresses who auditioned or were considered for the role included Jennifer Jason Leigh, who I honestly think would be pretty great in this role. Jessica Harper, who I love, the star of Phantom of the Paradise and Suspiria. Rosanna Arquette, Leah Thompson, who this would have been pre Back to the Future.
Yeah, would have been.
The role would ultimately go to Linda Hamilton, who was at the time a little known actress. She had just finished filming Children of the Corn, which was kind of her first big movie. But at the time she was auditioning for this, it had not come out yet. So nobody knew her from that yet.
I meant to say this earlier, but he talks about that casting is a huge deal for him in this. And this connects actually to some other stuff. So I loved it because you mentioned Dan O'Bannon earlier, and I love this. But he said, when he was talking about the effects and stuff, there was one thing I read. He said, quote, "Science fiction films are notoriously under budgeted until George Lucas came along. What happened, though, is that filmmakers have become hardware happy. The earlier movies told their stories through characters. And I think that earlier approach is better. Today's audience is being taken on a roller coaster ride where they sit there waiting to see an incredible special effect. They don't care what's going to happen next to the people because the filmmakers didn't create believable characters for whom the audience can really care for. With some of the smaller films coming out now, movie makers are realizing they have to concentrate on the people in the story." He said the most excellent example for him of this was The Dead Zone. So I loved that quote just because he connects it right back to Cronenberg there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, if you think about that quote and then think about Cameron's films, you do realize how character focused they really are. Like when I think of the Terminator, obviously we think of Arnold, but we think of Linda Hamilton very much. First and foremost, to me, even but that comes to my mind when somebody says the Terminator more so than the special effects or the action scenes. Same thing with Aliens. I'm thinking of Ellen Ripley. I'm thinking of Newt. I'm thinking of Michael Bihn's character, whose name I can't remember right now. But those are what come to mind to me when I think of Aliens. And then I think of Ellen Ripley in a power loader fighting the alien queen.
Yeah. I mean,
because he makes them about those characters in those situations.
He says in this movie, there's a love story at the heart of this movie. Yeah. To put it in a nutshell, I would call it a romantic nightmare. He said more work was spent from a writing and acting standpoint, trying to make the people believable in an everyday setting, both in the future and in the present. These are people who get up, eat their Wheaties, complain about how much money they're not getting at work. Then something incredible happens to them and the future drops down on them like a bag of bricks. The female lead, Linda Hamilton, goes from being a coffee shop waitress, a student, to where you see that she has to have the potential to be a world leader. This is what she's going to become. It's a very strong role for a woman, not one of these cliche female characters that has been in so much evidence recently. And that was like very much, this is like an early Terminator interview where he's saying this. This is like very much at the heart of what he's trying to make here.
That's very cool. So he would kind of finish off the casting by, he's got some other smaller roles that he's got to cast. He finds a role for his friend Lance Henriksen, who's cast as a police detective. Paul Winfield plays his partner. These are the guys who are kind of investigating the Sarah Connor killings, the phone book murderer, as they call him. Earl Bowen, who had a role in Battle Beyond the Stars. If you remember, Gary, remember the aliens that are all white? There's like 5 of them. And they speak in a hive mind. He's the main one of those. Earl Bowen, who he plays the criminal psychologist, Dr. Silberman.
I did not notice that.
Yeah,
but,
that's Earl Bowen. He's
wild.
in Battle Beyond the Stars. And we mentioned him before, but even Cameron's old pal, Bill Paxton, appears in a small role as a punk who gets destroyed by the Terminator at the beginning of the film. I love that in the first scene we get of the Terminator killing people, he doesn't have any guns and he just literally punches a hole in a guy's body. Brings his entire forearm out covered in blood. I was
really thinking about this time. I was like, he punches him so hard his fist just goes through him.
Yeah.
Through him.
Yeah. Now I mentioned all these actors.
You mentioned Earl Bowen, by the way, who gets to come back. So I love that he gets to recreate.
He's a recurring character. Character. Very memorable. But I try not to do a lot of research on this section because I don't want to take anything away from Todd's little segment. But I know without looking, one of the guys that I just mentioned is in Star Trek.
Oh yeah.
So I'm curious if there's any there are any others other than the one that I'm thinking of.
Oh, we've got a bunch today. There's actually quite a few. And I'll just go ahead and dive right in. Mr. Joe Farrago, or maybe Farrago, whatever.
Why not?
He plays a TV anchorman here in The Terminator. He was in Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country in 1991. He did some
second best Star Trek movie.
Yeah. He did some stunt work on that movie. And then we've got one of the other punks, not Bill Paxton, but Brian Thompson.
Brian Thompson's in everything.
Yeah, he's in a ton of stuff. He got started in Star Trek on the Next Generation season 2, episode 8, A Matter of Honor from 1989 as Clang.
Isn't he the serial killer in Cobra? Doesn't he play the serial killer in Cobra?
I think he does. Yeah, I think
he plays Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat, I believe.
Oh yeah.
He's in a lot of stuff. Like 80s and 90s. If it's an action movie, Brian Thompson's in there somewhere.
Oh yeah. Well, he didn't stop just at Next Gen. He was also Klingon helmsman in Star Trek Generations. That was in 1994.
That's right.
He did 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, and that was To the Death, season 4, episode 22, which was directed by LeVar Burton, and Rules of Acquisition, which was season 2, episode 7 in 1993.
That's a Ferengi episode.
That is definitely a Ferengi episode.
I mean, this guy looks, his face is made for that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like he's made to play bad guys, and he's made to be under prosthetics.
For sure. And then he finished out in the franchise on Star Trek Enterprise. He did 3 episodes in season 4. That was episode 12, 13, and 14, Babel 1, United, and the Anar, where he plays Admiral Valdor. Then we've got Dick Miller as the pawn shop clerk that
Arnold
shows up and kills him.
Yeah, we hadn't mentioned Dick Miller, but that's an old Corman alum.
Oh,
and, Dante. Yeah, Joe Dante loves that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he started in the franchise also on Next Gen with season 1, episode 11, The Big Goodbye. That's the one where they go in and Picard is playing Tommy Gun Dixon.
So they're in the holodeck? Is it
that's a holodeck episode. Okay. That's a fun one. And then he also did 2 episodes.
Why can't somebody in the future be named Tommy Gun Dixon?
Right. So Dick Miller also did 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine. It was season 3, episode 11 and 12, Past Tense, parts 1 and 2. Part 2 was actually directed by Jonathan Frakes. And this isn't Star Trek, but it's so rare to find somebody who's done some really cool animation. Dick Miller was also the voice of Chucky Saul in Batman Mask of the Phantasm in 1993, which is still to this day one of my favorite Batman movies. I love that so much.
Dick Miller is an absolute legend. I mean, he's in Little Shop of Horrors, the original, so that links back to that. But yeah, I mean, he is a mainstay in Roger Corman, and because of his status in Roger Corman movies, he became a mainstay in Joe Dante's movies, who I think he might have been in everything Joe Dante did. At least I think Dick Miller died a couple years ago, like 2019 yeah, he was pretty old, like in his 90s, but so he lived a good, long, successful life. But one of my favorite character actors of all time. Love that guy.
Nice. And then we've got Earl Bowen as Dr. Silverman. He did some work on Next Gen as well, season 2, episode 2, Where Silence Has Lease. That was in 1988. And after that, he had 3 different Star Trek video games. Star Trek Voyager Elite Force in 2000, Star Trek Armada 2 in 2001, and Star Trek Bridge Commander in 2002.
Every time you mention Star Trek video games, they sound made up.
Yeah, it does.
I just love that this might be somebody's first episode and somebody was just like, Jesus, okay, we get it. Lots of people are in Star Trek. We went through a whole David Cronenberg series
and had like 2 people.
No one was in there. And now somebody's first episode is going to be like, okay, like 50 fucking people each episode are going to be in Star Trek. We get it. That was the thought originally, I think.
Yeah.
It was also follow Computer Resume, which is Todd's Star Trek podcast. And I've been a guest on there a few times and have expressed my love for Hoshi, who now Todd sends me Instagram photos of constantly. And I get excited every time.
I want to be the friend that gives you the awkward boners, Gary.
Hoshi from Star Trek Enterprise.
Wait, you're not done though, right?
The good part of Star Trek Enterprise.
There's not many. You're not done though, right, Todd?
I got one more, and
it better be who I'm thinking of, or I'm gonna be mad.
I believe it is. It's Mr. Paul Winfield, who plays Lieutenant Ed Traxler here.
Wrath of Khan.
Yes, he was in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, 1982, as Captain Clark Terrell of the USS Reliant.
He gets the earwig, or
he gets
whatever
the earworm.
The scene that more than any other movie scene that I've ever seen in my entire life, because I saw it at such a young age, has just traumatized me. Like that's the first scene that I ever remember seeing in a movie that like gave me the creeps. Was that earwig scene.
Oh yeah,
Star Trek 2. And now it's my favorite Star Trek movie. So.
Well, that was not the only time he appeared in the franchise.
Really? Okay, that's the only one I knew of.
He was also in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, which it seems like everybody in this did some time on Next Gen.
Yeah, it ran for a while.
Yeah. He was in season 5, episode 2, Darmok, which was in 1991 as the Temerian Captain Dathon.
So he's under prosthetics.
He's under a bunch of prosthetics. But if you are a Star Trek fan and you're still having problems identifying who that is, he's the alien that Picard kind of gets paired with, and the universal translator breaks, and all he can say is Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. That's
wow. It's a real I Am Groot moment.
Yeah, very much. Well, it's the Temerians' dialect is actually based on metaphor. So they have to, to describe this situation, they're actually they use a different historical situation to describe it.
Interesting.
And-
I do not understand why so many Star Trek fans are virgins.
Yeah, that's so weird. The interesting fun fact for that episode is going to be that Winfield had trouble remembering his lines, and we'll do a whole bonus episode. We won't do a whole bonus episode.
No, we won't.
Todd will do a whole episode.
We'll wait. We'll
do
talk
a
about
bonus
that
episode.
eventually on Computer Resume podcast, which you can find wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Yep. And that's everybody on Star Trek.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
All right. So with this cast assembled, it was time to start shooting finally. But there was one little problem, and that was a guy named Dino De Laurentiis. Always a problem. Always a fucking problem, this guy.
You say that.
No, Dino De Laurentiis is great. I mean, he's a opinionated producer. We've talked about him lots of times on the podcast. Most recently in our last series, David Cronenberg. He was involved in that a little bit. But De Laurentiis in this situation, where he comes in, he's the producer of Conan the Barbarian, one of his biggest hits at the time. And it turned out that there was a preemptive option in Arnold Schwarzenegger's contract on that film, which what that means is that Schwarzenegger was contractually obligated to appear in the sequel to that film, which was Conan the Destroyer. So that meant, Conan the Barbarian was a hit. We're going to roll on a sequel. We're getting Arnold back in, and he has to come back. He's contractually obligated to do so. So that means that if James Cameron wants to keep Schwarzenegger as his Terminator, which he's pretty sold on at this point, then he's going to have to wait 9 months for the star to complete the new Conan movie. Now, 9 months is a long time, but it's not quite long enough to make another movie. But it is long enough to take on a few other writing gigs. So Cameron starts circulating his Terminator script as a writing example. Starts meeting with producers, showing them the script. This is what I can do. And what some of those producers that he met with were David Giler and Walter Hill. Longtime listeners of the podcast might recognize those names, very longtime listeners of the podcast, because they happened to be when he met with them, they happened to be in the early stages of developing a sequel to Ridley Scott's Alien, as we discussed on that episode way back when in our Dan O'Bannon series. Giler and Hill had produced and actually did some uncredited but very important writing on the original Alien. If you really want to dive into their contributions on that, I would recommend going and listening to that episode. It's a 2-parter, really good stuff. But this is another very strange way that Terminator is connected to Dan O'Bannon.
Yeah.
Everything's connected to Dan O'Bannon at some point, just like Roger Corman.
That's right.
I'm not going to get too far into how that meeting went. We're going to save that for our Aliens episode, which will be coming in a couple weeks. But suffice to say, Cameron got the job writing the Alien sequel. And on the same day that he got hired to write the Alien sequel, he also got hired to write the sequel to First Blood, the new Rambo movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he's writing Rambo 2. So during this time, he's also using that 9-month break to polish his own Terminator script, to kind of work on it more, because why not? You've got the time.
Yeah.
That meant that for about a 3-month period in 1983, James Cameron was writing 3 separate scripts, 2 of which are sequels to major hits in Hollywood.
He talks a little bit about how, that it was also, it was interesting how he viewed it. In one interview I was reading it, there was he talks about, he says there's a hiatus in production of Terminator where I had the interview was basically asking him about screenwriting, like how he felt about screenwriting, or if that's what got him, or if that's what he's more interested in, or directing. And he was just basically saying, he's like, well, during the production of Terminator, I had this opportunity to write 2 other scripts, basically on the strength of the one. He says the first one, he said, was The Mission, aka Rambo, the sequel to First Blood. That was what it was called at the time. He said they switched the name after the fact, and Sylvester Stallone changed things after the fact. He said, but I was okay. That was a given. I was a hired gun, and I took it for that reason, because I wanted to see what it was like to write without hoping to direct. And he said, but he was like, it's not everything I wanted, but it got me involved with Walter Hill and David Giler. And they were saying, like, Walter Hill, that's a huge name. Is that validation for you? And he was like, yeah, it was absolute validation. He said, when I was Riding the Terminator in certain scenes, I was thinking of his movie, The Driver.
The Driver.
Yeah.
That's funny that he says that, because I have not heard this quote, Gary, but when I was watching The Terminator this morning, I was rewatching it, and those driving scenes, which are at night under these like Los Angeles street lights, I was like, I immediately thought of Walter Hill's The Driver.
That's awesome. Yeah. He said I was, not that I was cribbing. I had only seen it once. And he said, I had a dim memory of the kinetic forward energy that he had in this movie. But he was like, while I was riding the Terminator, the Road Warrior also came out. And I said, okay, this is the next step. Mm-hmm. And nobody in between had come close. He said, my interpretation of Walter supporting me is that he viewed me as the next to succeed him. So that gave me validation to go on to the next stage.
I love Walter Hill, and I feel like we've brought him up a few times on the podcast here. He's a director that I think a lot of younger film fans might not be aware of, or aware of his contributions to film. But man, I one day on this podcast, and it might be years down the line, but we're going to do a Walter Hill series, because I would love, Streets of Fire, The Warriors. Like I absolutely want to do a Walter Hill series. I love that guy.
Nice.
Yeah. And George Miller, for that matter. We were just talking about that on Twitter with some folks when the trailer for his new movie came out, but I definitely want to do George Miller one day on this show.
Right.
So a lot of what Cameron ended up writing for First Blood Part 2 didn't get used in the final film. That's a story for another day. But as he mentioned in that quote, it was Sylvester Stallone taking things over and being Sylvester Stallone. And Cameron was also only able to kind of finish the first 2 acts of the Alien sequel before it was time to dive into shooting the Terminator. So he finishes those. We'll get into how he gets back involved in the Alien sequel on our next episode. But for now, that's passed. Those 9 months have passed. We've got Arnold Schwarzenegger once again available, and it's time to start working on the film. Now, we mentioned this is a $6 million budget. $6 million, even by early 1980s standards, is still pretty small for a script as ambitious as Cameron's. A script that's got sequences set in a post-apocalyptic future where there are giant robots and giant tanks, like futuristic tanks and futuristic helicopter ship things. It's a lot for a $6 million movie. And there were going to be a lot of special effects, not just in those scenes, but prosthetic effects. You've got he wanted to have he was envisioning a full-sized robotic endoskeleton for the end of the movie. He was envisioning human prosthetics that were convincing enough that he could linger on them in close-up, like in the scene where the injured Terminator has to perform surgery on his own face. Mm-hmm. He knew how he wanted to shoot these. Now, he had an idea of who he wanted to use to do these. And it was a guy, you guys have heard his name if you've been listening to the show for a while, Dick Smith.
I'm somewhat of a Dick Smith myself.
Thank you, Gary. So Dick Smith, if you've been listening to the show, you might remember this, but if it's your first time listening, Dick Smith was a special effects legend that worked on The Godfather and The Exorcist. And more recently that we've discussed here on the show, he worked on David Cronenberg's Scanners and did special effects for that. And in fact, invented special effects techniques that were used specifically for that. So James Cameron knows this guy, knows that he's a legend. He wants this guy to do the Terminator. He offers him the job, and Dick Smith turns it down. He doesn't turn it down because he doesn't think the script sucks. He doesn't think it's not because of scheduling or anything like that. It's basically Dick Smith. His reason was that he didn't think he could do it. He thought that this was out of his skill set. He's like, I'm a makeup artist. I can do bladder work, that kind of special effect, but I do prosthetics. I don't build animatronic robots. That's not my thing. It's not what I do. So he was turning it down, not because he didn't have faith in the project, just because he thought that somebody else could do a better job than him. And he suggested his friend, Stan Winston. Now, when you talk about legends of the makeup effects industry, there are a few names that often come up. Dick Smith is one of those. Rick Baker is one of those who we've talked about here on the show. Tom Savini, who we did an entire series on. Greg Nicotero, Rob Bottin. And Stan Winston is one of those names that will always be near the top when you're having that discussion.
Absolutely.
If you look at his career, he'd go on to work on stuff like Predator, Edward Scissorhands, Jurassic Park. I mean, he created the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. He didn't direct a lot of movies, but he did Pumpkinhead, which I love, which stars the great Lance Henriksen. It's a great movie. I really love Pumpkinhead. And we've already talked about him here on the podcast because of his work on Dead and Buried. That was back in our Dan O'Bannon series. Toby Hooper's Invaders from Mars. He created the goofy, fun-looking aliens in that, which are the best part of that movie, I think. In fact, when he was approached about the Terminator, he had just finished Dead and Buried. And he had also recently received his first of many, many, many Oscar nominations for his makeup work on an Alan Arkish film called Heartbeeps. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Heartbeeps. Alan Arkish is another Roger Corman alum. He directed Rock and Roll High School, and Heartbeeps stars Andy Kaufman as a robot. It's a very strange movie.
Oh, wow.
That I haven't seen it since like the 90s when I rented it, on VHS, like the early 90s, mid 90s, whenever I was, renting stuff every day. I don't remember it being that good, but the makeup effects were really good. So he got nominated for an Oscar for those. He lost to Rick Baker for American Werewolf in London, which fair.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose to Rick Baker.
We talk a little bit about like Cameron having this like his left and right hemisphere of his brain, like this part of the art and the science coming together, and it's pretty interesting because I definitely was reading stuff. I had made a note of one here that just like his view of the writing process, I had noted it as, and because I thought it was like interesting for like people if they were going to write science fiction screenplays. He says, I wrote the script with a strategy in mind, knowing the movie would be in competition with big FX films. For X number of special effects, you must spend X number of dollars at the threshold. Below that, you'll be showing people things they don't want to see. The audience has become visually educated and sophisticated and even a bit jaded by the big guys. My strategy was not to do special effects from beginning to end. The story is set in Los Angeles, 1984, and the main character is the girl next door. Everything plays out from beginning to end against an everyday backdrop. I think when a film is under consideration for production, the first and foremost question is, does it work dramatically? If it doesn't, it will never get to the point of people worrying about how much it costs. Writers should know enough about special effects to be able to stay away from them. Worst thing you can ever do is overburden a script with effects, which will scare people away. On the other hand, you must have something visually interesting. And I bring that up.
Was that quote before or after Avatar?
Well, I was going to say, it's so interesting because it's like, I didn't want to say it, but now that you've said that, I was going to say the hypocritical thing about James Cameron that I see is I 100% copied that quote. And at the same time, even with Terminator, he talks about, and I've got one for later with him talking about this, like about the reactions from when the movie came out, but it's essentially about how these fucking people didn't know what I was going to bring them. Like
Yeah.
they're used to people teasing them with shit that they're not actually going to see. And like, I'm going to show it to you. Like, yeah. I'm gonna give it to you. And,
well, I think the way that he writes this, he wrote the script to the Terminator with the effects in mind. I mentioned earlier that I've been watching his masterclass. I highly recommend it if you feel like splurging on something. The masterclass. I got myself a subscription to it because there's James Cameron, there's Martin Scorsese, David Lynch. If some of my favorite directors are going to teach me how to make movies, even if I don't really have any aspirations to make movies, it still helps me to understand the way movies are made. And James Cameron's is really good. And he does, there's a class on there where he talks about filmmaking for a low budget. And he wrote the Terminator knowing that he wasn't going to have a lot of money for the special effects. That's why he set it in modern day. He set it in Los Angeles. He knew that he could shoot on location because a lot of it's out on the streets. He doesn't have to build sets. He could save his money for the effects that he was going to include, most of which come at either the end of the film or in the flash forward to the future.
How about this? Maybe it's just my mind, just like wreaking havoc because we're doing such a long ass episode on the Terminator, but I love this movie. But what if it's that the exact reverse happens on Avatar? And I know this is a discussion for Avatar, but what if it's like, I'll take a story that has been tried and true, and I already know the story's there, so now I can fuck around in the effects.
Yeah,
because we've got the dramatic
and show them something they've
show.
never seen before.
Yeah,
Yep.
we already know the drama works.
Yeah,
so now let's do like as much crazy shit as we can do visually.
Yeah, maybe. So Cameron and Winston, they meet about the special effects. Obviously, the budget's a point of conversation, but they instantly clicked. They saw like-minded individuals in each other. They both saw someone that was very artistic, very intelligent, and a little bit crazy. It's basically the way that they describe it. They were bros. They had a bromance, just like Cameron and Arnold had a bromance, just like Cameron and Bill Paxton had a bromance. Like he's making buddies left and right here. Him and Lance Henriksen. He's for all the talk about James Cameron kind of being a dick on the set, he's got a lot of buddies.
And this may or may not have anything to do with your pockets, but Mr. Cameron, if you're listening right now and you need a new friend, I am also here.
I would like to offer my services as your friend.
I would like to be buddies with you.
But Winston, he read Cameron's script and he was kind of looking for a challenge. He wanted to do something a little bit more than what he had done, which had mostly been prosthetic work. He wanted to move a little bit further than that. And Cameron's script provided the challenge that he was looking for. Now, usually when you talk about a special effects guy on a movie, when you bring in a Rick Baker, you have Rick Baker design. Rick Baker reads the script. Rick Baker reads about the flesh television that you've written in your Videodrome script, and then he visualizes what that's going to actually look like based on the script's description. That's how that usually works. Now, in the case of the Terminator, normally that would be Stan Winston reading the script and coming up with the visual look of the Terminator based on how it's described in James Cameron's screenplay, right? But Cameron, as we've said, it was an accomplished visual artist, and he had already created several detailed drawings of what he thought the cyborg should look like, which began back in that night in Rome when he was having his fever dream and started furiously sketching this dream out on the hotel stationery. He knew what he wanted this thing to look like. So Stan Winston's job was basically to refine this into something that could be created physically. And so him and Cameron, they kind of go back and forth on this design, tweak it here and there. And they refine it to a point where the final look of it looks almost identical to Cameron's initial drawing. Look up the drawing that James Cameron did, because it's very easy to find, of that Terminator. It's a pencil sketch of the Terminator with a kitchen knife in its hand. It's just the torso, and it looks like the Terminator. I mean, it really does. Wow. So Stan Winston basically had to turn that into a 3D reality. They had to build it. Now, the thing is, because you could see the robot skeleton, because you can see through it in parts, and because it's so thin in parts, you couldn't do like man in rubber suit. That wasn't going to work. This was going to have to be a full-size puppet. So they built a full-sized Terminator puppet, life-sized. It took about 7 artists working continuously for 6 months to build this puppet. They molded it in clay and then plaster and then urethane. Then the mold was cast in epoxy and fiberglass and reinforced with steel ribbing. And then the whole thing was just stressed and aged to give it kind of a worn-in look. And in the end, this puppet weighed over 100 pounds. Wow. This thing. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Now, obviously, there are also scenes where it's stop motion, like where you can see the full body all in one frame. It's stop motion, which, has aged like stop motion normally does. You can tell it's stop motion, but it's part of the charm of the effect in the Terminator, in my opinion. But the scenes where you see the close-up of him like coming after Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese at the end, that's the puppet. That's a full-size, man-sized endoskeleton. That's pretty rad.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So we also mentioned the Terminator surgery scene a few minutes ago. That's what, when I think of the Terminator, there are a handful of major set pieces that I think about that like always stand out in my mind. One of them is which I'll talk about in a minute, but the assault on the nightclub. There's the police station. There are the future scenes. There's the surgery scene that I'm about to talk about. and there's the end of the movie where the endoskeleton comes out. Those are kind of like the major set pieces of this, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So for this surgery scene, Winston sculpted he had to make a life-size copy of Schwarzenegger's face. There was no other way to do this. He made a life-size copy of Schwarzenegger's face in various poses using silicone, clay, and plaster. And then they had to basically film the scene in a way that they could cut back and forth between Arnold and this thing. Because not only do you have the face, he's missing an eye at that point, or he carves out his eye, and obviously that's a fake head. And the way they did that is, so they've got the puppet, they've got this head that looks like Schwarzenegger, and it's animatronic, and you've got a hand here like above one eye holding the what is it called, an X-Acto knife, the other hand holding the eye kind of apart so that he can work the surgery. And one of those hands was Arnold Schwarzenegger's, the other one was some other random crew member, because they had two guys standing. They basically framed it to where you can see the face, you can see the hands coming in, but one of those was not Arnold's because he had to stand to the side of the frame. So the one holding the eye was Arnold's. The one cutting was someone else's that kind of had a hand that looked a little bit like Arnold's, but you can't tell in the movie. I mean, that's movie magic, I guess. It looks, and yes, it looks a little fake now, but it's for 1984, man, it's pretty damn good.
I wanted to throw in that, like, as a kid watching this movie, that scene has always, especially him like fucking pulling his eyeball out with a scalpel. All of that stuff like still affects me to this day. I think I have
you've got an eyeball thing.
I was about to say, I think this may be the origin of an eyeball thing. It's just like seeing him do that. It worked on me. So it's hard to appreciate, just like for like when you haven't seen the thing before, or like haven't seen beyond that before, how realistic it feels seeing it for the first time. I was watching it this time and thinking like, okay, it's dated. Like you can totally see it, but I think it's fine. Like I think
it's fine too.
It's part of the charm.
It's a good
of
effect.
The thing. It still works pretty well, and I don't know. Like it just I really appreciated a lot of the effects in this movie, and even this time around, I was reading about how like if you're wondering, Arnold Schwarzenegger forgot to take his makeup off one day and went and ordered food afterwards. And like freaked out the fucking people at the hotel restaurant when he walked in, and like half his face is melted off.
I love that.
And so it did work. For like
the effect.
Well, I also love tech noir basically too, just for what it's worth, just to mention it in there. We think about movies like Blade Runner. That's 100% what James Cameron was thinking about there. Like he was trying to they literally had to turn people away thinking that it was a legit nightclub, like at the time they were like making this thing, but like it was made like considering like Blade Runner and like just having that vibe of that sort of thing. I thought that was kind of cool. They did a lot of guerrilla style filmmaking,
especially towards the end. Towards the end, they had to pick up some shots where it was like the very last scene was a guerrilla style with Sarah Connor and the Jeep at the end. But they had a few pickup shots where it was like James Cameron and like four other people, and James Cameron's holding the camera himself. And, that's just coming from that Roger Corman school of filmmaking. Just get the shot however you can get the shot.
I just appreciate that. Like he went through a lot.
He still went very like independent B movie. That's what this is. I mean,
exactly.
You don't think about it, but because of what it has spawned. But at the time, like this is a small little dirty scuzzy B movie. It really it happens to be an incredibly well made one, but that's what it is. Now going back to that surgery scene, there's another cool bit of special effects in that, because not only is he doing surgery on his eye, which by the way, in that scene where it is Arnold, you see him bring up the X-Acto knife to his eye to start cutting it. And you can't see the blade because it's on the other side of his nose. But if you slow it down, and in that masterclass, James Cameron slows the scene down to show you this. The X-Acto blade doesn't have a blade on it.
I thought I caught that. I was like,
He's like
where's the
now
blade?
he's like, well, if you did it now, you would of course CGI a blade on, but we couldn't do that at the time, and we weren't going to ask Arnold to put an X-Acto blade in his eye. So so they had to it's quick enough to where you can't see it unless you're really looking for it. But yeah, but the other part of that scene I wanted to mention was he's doing surgery on his arm as well. He's been injured, and the way that scene is done is they have Arnold sit down at a table, put his hand down, and they establish it where you see the whole table. So you can see that there's not like a hole in it or anything like that, right? He puts his hand down, and then in the next shot, Arnold's arm is hidden. And they've got a fake arm. They've got a fake arm laying on the table. There's a puppeteer under the table who's using his hand to manipulate the hand. And then they've got wires running from this arm off screen where another puppeteer is using animatronics to make the insides of the arm move. It's really cool. And they sketched that out on a storyboard. Now, one thing we talked about in our David Cronenberg series is how much he hates storyboards. James Cameron is the opposite. James Cameron storyboards the shit out of everything because he's using a lot of effects, and he knows, especially coming from that Roger Corman background, he's like, if we map this out, we'll be able to see exactly where every dime is going. So he storyboards everything. He knows the movie in his head before he ever steps foot on a set. Wow. So it's just kind of cool doing these two series back to back, seeing very different approaches to filmmaking.
I mean, we haven't even like dipped into time travel, but otherwise I will say that like James Cameron seems to have like so much thought put into every fucking thing. Did you see the stuff about like in the original script too? He even had a thing about like Sarah Connor had like a figure skating injury. Yeah, like she had a figure skating injury that there was like going to be a note about on like one of the readouts, and so she would have surgical pins like in her knee or something. And so the Terminator would go in, and each Sarah Connor that he kills, he's like hacking open the leg of the person.
That's fucking cool.
To look for the pins, because he just knew that like that's how you could identify the proper Sarah Connor was like these surgical pins.
Wow. That's funny. I kind of love that. That kind of would have worked out because once they started filming, as Linda Hamilton, like a week before filming, she actually sprained her ankle, like severely sprained her ankle. So that could have actually worked out because she would have had a limp.
Right.
Possibly, right?
Yeah.
So, but they ended up having to basically rearrange the entire production schedule so that her running scenes would be filmed as late into the shoot as possible. And then even after the delay, she had to have her ankle taped every day and was reportedly in a great deal of pain for most of the filming of the Terminator. And you got to think at this point, but they couldn't let that stop them, right? So this movie started shooting in March of 1984. They were talking to Arnold in 1982. There have been 2 years of development from the time that they started working on this to the time that they actually filmed it. And part of that is because Arnold was unavailable for the better part of a year because he had to go back and shoot the other Conan movie. So they couldn't let Linda Hamilton getting a sprained ankle really stopped them. They had to kind of work around it. That there was a lot of necessity on this film because of the way they were having to shoot, because it was a low budget. There's a lot of night scenes. Most of the movie is at night, which the producers were at Orion. They were like, can we maybe just like do some daytime stuff because it's cheaper? And Cameron was adamant that this needs to be filmed at night. That was the vibe he was going for. And I think he's right. I think it works for this film. There's a lot of daytime stuff in Terminator 2. But I think that the nighttime stuff really works for what he's going for here. But it also meant that they're shooting overnight, so they're constantly fighting the clock, trying to get in as many shots as possible before the sun comes up. So it's not an easy shoot. And James Cameron, this is something I think we'll probably see time and time again. He's a very hands-on director. It's something that he worked again. It's something that he learned working for Corman. On a Corman set, if something needs to be done, if a light needs to be moved from here to here, you don't go find another guy to do it. You just move the fucking light. That's what you do on a Roger Corman set.
Yeah.
So James Cameron's used to just doing things himself. Something needs to be done, he's going to do it. He's not going to go find somebody in another department to do it. He's just going to do it. So he developed this habit of doing anything and everything needed on set. In fact, it's something he does through his whole career. By the time Avatar comes around, He's operating the camera. He's editing the footage. He's mixing the sound. Like he's a regular Robert Rodriguez on a $200 million budget by the time Avatar comes around. He is capable of doing nearly every technical job on set because a lot of these he's done before during his career. He's as good at doing any of these things as anyone in those departments. And he knows that he can do that. And he's going to do it. And sometimes he even does things he probably shouldn't have. Schwarzenegger tells a story about the Terminator, about the filming of the Terminator, where James Cameron is demonstrating how he wants Arnold to ride on the motorcycle and kind of spin it around, doing like a 180, which is something that probably should have been demonstrated by, I don't know, the stunt team, the stunt coordinator. But Cameron didn't want to wait on a stunt coordinator. So he hops on the fucking motorcycle and does it himself. Goes, hey, this is how you want to do it. And he does it. And he could have gotten killed, but that's just who James Cameron is, I guess.
That's so great.
And if we're being honest, I think that's probably Cameron's machismo at play. Cameron is, we kind of joked about this earlier. Yes, he's an artist. He's an intellectual, but he's also very much like, I'm a man's man. I'm an adventurer. I ride motorcycles and I go deep sea diving.
Yeah.
So he reminds me of what some music producers would probably be like too. Like they're like, if you watch Wayne's World 2, where Christopher Walken plays the music producer. And I always think of, who's the big bearded guy? I forget his name. The music producer. Rick Rubin. God, I couldn't think of his name. But he can play like every fucking instrument in the building, and like he can kill it. But like in Wayne's World 2, where like the band, like Tia Carrere's like band's having trouble, like the guy's trying to get the solo, and Christopher Walken like takes the guitar. It's like, no, it'll be like this, and like just like wails on a solo. Right. So like that's what you're supposed to do. It gives it back to him. And you're like, Jesus, who is this guy? I feel like Cameron's like
James Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because even I mentioned that quote earlier where he was talking about like early on in his career, like you can take advantage, you get gonzo filmmaking, you get like a mentality of like you just got to go all in, and later on you got to delegate. But he, in that same interview later on, talks about like how he feels like in certain movies around the time he starts to see filmmakers delegate too much, and they're not in control of the nuances that make their film special. And so like he does talk about this a lot, that he believes like him controlling certain things, like in a hands-on approach, give it texture that other filmmakers don't have. He says people can smell when something is too glossy or too packaged. They like underdogs. And so him being in control and building every aspect like makes a difference. It makes it an underdog movie for a production standpoint, that he's like hands-on so much on some of his stuff.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about the filming of the Terminator, I do want to mention a couple other scenes. There's the future war sequence. It's a little dated. It does feel it feels more low budget than anything else in the movie, but I still really like the look of it. That's Cameron using every technique at his disposal. They're making models, they're doing rear projection, and it's pretty impressive because this is 1984. CGI does not exist. That's not an option. So they have to do everything the old fashioned way. And I love the look of the future war stuff because of that. I also want to mention the tech noir scene, which is maybe my favorite sequence in the whole movie, just from a filmmaking standpoint, that dance club scene. The way that scene is constructed is like, you can tell James Cameron just knows what he's doing. He just knows how to construct a scene, because that scene, the way that it builds it, first of all, it takes place at a perfect time in the film. Because the beginning of the film, you're following three separate storylines. You're following Sarah Connor, you're following Kyle Reese, and you're following the Terminator. That dance club scene is when all three of those converge in one place. And at this point in the film, you don't know who Kyle Reese is. You don't know that he's the good guy. He could very well be another bad guy, which is what Sarah Connor thinks, because she sees him kind of stalking her almost. So there's a lot of danger in the scene because of that. But the way that it's edited, it's kind of slowly moves into slow motion. where she realizes she sees Kyle Reese across the bar, and then the Terminator comes in, and you don't really know what's going on as a viewer. I'd say as a viewer in 1984, because you've never seen this movie, right? You don't know what's going on. It's an expertly edited scene. So I have to also mention Mark Goldblatt. Mark Goldblatt's the editor on this. We've talked about Mark Goldblatt here on the show before. He does a lot of stuff for James Cameron, but he also did a lot of stuff for Paul Verhoeven. He did Starship Troopers. He did Showgirls. He did Hollow Man. He did The Last Boy Scout, if we want to go back to our Shane Black series. He's worked with Joe Dante on Piranha, on The Howling. He did Humanoids from the Deep for Roger Corman. He did Rambo 2. He's done a lot of Michael Bay movies. He is like one of the best editors to ever work in the business.
Wow.
Mark Goldblatt. He's a director too. I think he directed he's not as good of a director, honestly, as he is an editor, because I think he directed Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren.
Oh.
But he also directed Dead Heat, which is not exactly a good movie, but it's a movie that I very much enjoy. Dead Heat with Joe Piscopo.
Oh.
It's really good. If you haven't seen it, go watch the Joe Bob version from last season. It's really good. But Mark Goldblatt as an editor is incredible. And the way that he does that sequence, I think, is really outstanding. It's really, really good. So even though James Cameron conceptualized it, the editor is the one who brought that sequence to life. So we have to give props where they're due, I think.
Nice.
While we're giving props where they're due, I think we have to mention Brad Fiedel, the guy who composed the score, an iconic score. We've already mentioned it on the show because I think we all love that score so much. Brad Fiedel had mostly done television stuff before this. He'd done a couple of small indie films, but it was really his work on this film that set his career in motion. They didn't want to give him the job at first because he didn't have any experience, but he sent them kind of some ideas of some music he had composed. This is the direction I think we should go in. And they liked it and they thought it would work with the film. His career later on, he would do stuff like, Fright Night, Serpent and the Rainbow, Blue Steel, which is a great movie from one of James Cameron's ex-wives directed that movie, and Johnny Mnemonic, which is not a great movie, but I like it.
Yeah.
That's fine. Dolph Lundgren,
another Dolph Lundgren mention twice in 2 minutes. Right.
It's Jesus.
Terminator's done, filming's done, editing's done, and Cameron watches the final film and he's very happy with the end result. He thinks he created the movie he wanted to create. But the folks at Orion were not as confident in it. They kind of viewed this as just another low budget genre film, which they released a lot of. Orion did. They released a lot of low budget genre films. It made them a lot of money. But they thought this was another one that they would throw out in theaters and make a little bit of money, and it'd be gone in a couple of weeks, right? And it honestly seems like a couple of the people who were making the movie, a couple of the film stars kind of felt that way too, because both Linda Hamilton and Arnold Schwarzenegger have gone on record as not having a whole lot of faith in the film before they made it. There's a famous story that goes around a lot of Arnold being interviewed on the set of Conan the Destroyer, and an interview saw him grab a pair of like motorcycle boots that he was about to change into to try on. And they asked what they were for, and his reply was that they were for this little shit movie I'm doing. Of course, that movie was the Terminator. So nice. Even though, he liked James Cameron, but he didn't see this as like a big stepping stone in his career, that obviously it would end up being. So Orion, they're kind of worried that the critics would trash it. They didn't really see what they had on their hands. So they only had a single press screening for the film. And what little money they actually spent on advertising, they did so like in the week before the film's release. There wasn't like a big promotional push for this movie. But the critics who did get to see it on those early reviews, and ones who got to see it later on after it had come out and become a hit, seemed to really love it. The Los Angeles Times said it was a crackling thriller full of all sorts of gory treats, which is just a review that I enjoy. I just like that quote. Time Magazine actually named it one of their top 10 films of the year at the end of 1984, which is pretty impressive. Yeah. Janet Maslin, who was a longtime critic for the New York Times, in one of my favorite quotes from a review of the film, said that This is a monster movie, and the role of the monster fits Mr. Schwarzenegger just fine. I just like that quote a lot because I think they also kind of see, I think that she saw exactly what kind of movie this really is. But I'm guessing, Gary, that even though this movie is legendary, that there might be a few reviewers out there who didn't see it as so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as per usual, even though the Terminator never sleeps, there's always going to be somebody that needs to take a nap. I do want to mention though that in regards to the gore, like James Cameron like takes exception to that. He keeps saying like in interviews that like it's a gun and run, a shoot 'em up. Many people there's really not a lot of gore, but there isn't much gore. The violence is never rubbed in your face. It's done off screen and used for dramatic effect. He says, I think the audience will realize that all this violence is directed at an unkillable machine, not a man.
Most of the gore is on the Terminator.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. But going back to the effects too, real quick, one of the things I loved about what he said that he was proud of is the reviews, like watching people in the theaters, because he said Orion compressed all their ad money into the week before release and only did like one preview. He said people went in thinking this is going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think I mentioned this before, but as Dirty Harry, maybe with a sci-fi edge to it. He said they had no concept of where the road was really going to take them. And that's great because to me, that's what a movie really is. You sit down and it takes you somewhere. The best is if it could take you beyond where you thought you were going to go. And in a way that is not so surprising, or in a way that is not so surprising that you don't buy it. If you go back and look, the final version of the robot in Terminator, he's like, we totally prepared for it the whole time. There's this scene where the Terminator repairs his eye. You see the mechanism in his arm. You've known it was there the whole time, but people are conditioned to not getting what they want in the movies, to always thinking the filmmaker is going to cheat them and that he's just describing a fantastic machine. You're not really going to see it. And he said, at our count on one preview, the audience was very young. He said 12 to 18 year olds in the whole thing. And they were hyper. They were screaming. They were ripping the wallpaper off the walls. And I thought there's no way they're going to sit quietly through long character scenes like the one in the culvert. But he's like, they sat through it all in full attention. He said, my interpretation is that the overall sense of dread of this character constantly coming back is so well established. They might have been thinking the Terminator was going to walk in while Sarah and Kyle are talking, but at least they knew it had been established that what they said would have some bearing on the action. He was like really proud of like seeing, he's like, these are all young people watching this movie and they're like super into this movie, the whole thing, the whole time. And he's like, and then we give them what they don't expect, like that, which is the actual thing, like on screen. And I just always love that. Or when I was reading through stuff, I love that quote from him. Anyway, like you said, there's John 316 here on IMDb gave it 1 out of 5 stars. He says, why they have to ruin good action sci-fi movie with porn?
fucking guy named John 316 would say that.
Soft and near hardcore porn. This movie has 2 sex scenes. By the way, this guy's spelling, I can't even describe to you. Like he spells scenes, S-E-A-N-S. It has 2 sections. One Sarah, S-E-R-A. One Sarah Connor roommate and boyfriend having sex. You only see it from shoulder up, but there is sexual action going on. Another is Sarah and Kyle, who he by the way, it spells C-Y-L-E. Kyle,
is this satire? Are we sure this is not satire?
I don't know. Having sex, you see her breasts and thrusting and grunting. And in another scene, you see Arnold Schwarzenegger totally nude, never show his crotch, but everything else shown. And in another scene, you see Kyle. This time he just spelled out full out cycle. In the other scene, you see cycle, and most of his body nude. The only thing they don't show is his crotch. P.S. Show Terminator pulls a guy's heart out. Wish there was a true PG version with no nudity or sex. Sean's or hearts being pulled out. I don't recommend for kids. Porn motivates rap and other sexual assault and cheating. I assume he means rape.
I assume it means rape and not the music genre.
I recommend always check Movie with Movie Guide or other websites to find out of things you don't want to see buying.
Well, to be fair, that's good advice.
Well, oh God, that guy. I don't think he's ever seen porn. Honestly, not sure he ever saw a boob before this movie.
Yeah, you might be right. Anthony says his review is titled "Terminated." The review says, "Oh please, the only good thing about this movie is Linda Hamilton's mullet."
It's the most dated thing in the whole movie, honestly.
Yeah.
Her hair dates this movie more than anything else.
I don't know. The hair, maybe. That moped, definitely.
I don't know. You don't live in my neighborhood. There's a lot of those mopeds around here. A lot of DUIs.
Movie expert 005 says, "Waste of time and James Cameron the thief. Most movies from James Cameron are stealing from other movies. Terminator is stealing from Westworld, Gunslinger. Many action scenes from Terminator 2 are stealing from RoboCop. Abyss is only underwater, but it's stealing from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. True Lies is stealing from La Totale. Avatar is stealing from Dances with Wolves or Pocahontas. Titanic is stealing from A Night to Remember. Aliens is stealing from the original Alien. And Alita Battle Angel is stealing from iRobot with Will Smith. I don't like James Cameron. He is an antichrist. And all of James Cameron movies are very boring and long."
That sounds like some anti-James Cameron propaganda there. He didn't even direct Alita Battle Angel. Although that movie rules.
The title of this review is "He'll Not Be Back on My Screen."
All right. Points for that, honestly.
All right.
This film is really bad and badly aged. Not for people who like visual effects or a strong plot. Bad editing, bad effects, terrible script, characters you don't care for. This film is aged like a dog turd in a milky basket.
A milky basket.
He said, "I think Wallace and Gromit did it better."
Did they do a Terminator?
I don't know.
I'd like to see that. I like their werewolf movie.
All right.
Patrick Starr says 1 star. His name's Patrick Starr. He gives it 1 star. Literally rips off Back to the Future.
Wow, a movie that came out 3 years later or 1 year later.
Delcha Man says, "Just go back to the time John Connor was a baby, you dumb shit."
All right. You're not wrong.
Yeah, that's fair.
Babies are very slow.
Peter Ebert, who I assume is related to Robert, says,
yes, Roger's cousin,
gave it 1 star. Says, "Genuinely one of the worst movies ever made. Infinite number of plot holes aside from the acting being piss poor, makeup offensively bad, and the sex scene is so devoid of passion that I'm contemplating a pivot to Volcel." What is that?
Voluntary celibacy.
Oh, I didn't know what that meant. Okay.
It's the opposite of incel, which is involuntary celibacy.
Gotcha. I'm dumbfounded how this movie is both so influential and popular. It downright sucks. That's what Peter Ebert says.
Shut up, Peter.
Eve says, "Arnie said I'll be back." And I thought, I hope the fuck not. Flip Flap is the final one, who says, "The guy falling in love with the photo scared me the most."
That it?
That's it.
All right. So
that's all the people in movie reviews.
When the film premiered on October 26, 1984, audiences quickly proved the folks at Orion wrong. Also quickly proved these goobers wrong, who Gary was just reading reviews of. The movie was very popular. It earned $4 million its opening week. That made it number 1 at the box office. It would continue its reign at number 1 the following week. And all in all, the film would end up grossing $78 million worldwide. Remember, that's on a $6 million budget.
Wow.
That's a hell of a profit.
Yeah.
And this is, again, the first of many times that Hollywood would doubt James Cameron only to have his project become a massive success. If the film was a hit at the box office, though, it was an even bigger hit on home video. Remember, this was like the golden age VHS. And over the years, it has also begun to be considered a classic, even if I think nowadays it's kind of overshadowed by its sequels, especially Terminator 2. I feel like a lot of people overlook this one because of Terminator 2, but this movie I think does deserve to be discussed as an important film.
Yeah.
I really think so. I think The Terminator is one of those movies that sort of transcends its genre because of the sheer talent of its filmmaker. You know, this was considered by nearly everyone involved in its creation, except for Cameron, to be just another cheap little B movie. And I have to imagine a lot of folks who went to see it, critics and audiences, went in thinking kind of the same thing. You know, we're all similar ages, the three of us. We're all in, Todd, what are you, 37, 38?
I'm 38.
38. And me and Gary are 40. So we're all close to the same age. And we're at an age where the Terminator, not the film, just the character itself, has always been around.
Yeah.
Basically. I mean, I was 3 years old when this movie came out. So the Terminator has always existed. It's always been around. I think most of us were probably even introduced to the character through Terminator 2 before ever seeing the first. I know that's the case with me. I definitely saw Terminator 2 first. So we've always kind of known the character as this sort of pop culture icon. But imagine it's 1984 and you're going to see this movie and you have no expectations. You're just at the movies for what you think is going to be this fun little gritty sci-fi action movie. And what you get instead is an incredibly well-made, intense thriller that's meticulously constructed with a kind of pretty complex mind fuck of a plot that you're not used to seeing in these little movies.
Yeah.
Speaking of the plot, though, this is probably the point where we need to pause and allow Gary to probably rant about the time travel stuff in this movie. I know it's going to happen.
Well, fire it up, Gary. Go for it.
No, I mean, I mentioned the one review. Obviously, it's like, why not go here? I mean, there were reviews that I saw that people were like, why not go if you know that it doesn't work, which you would immediately, then why not send it back 10 years before that, or 10 years before that, or maybe to
Kyle Reese
grandparents, or
Kyle Reese doesn't have a way to communicate with the future to tell them.
No,
right?
I mean, you would.
They would know immediately, because when they send Kyle Reese, if the machines don't just disappear, then they know that it hasn't worked.
Yeah, or if the war is still going on, the machines should logically know that it didn't work.
No. There's a lot of paradoxes in this. I mean, honestly, like if Kyle Reese succeeded, then he would never be sent back.
He would never be sent back. John Connor would never be born, or whatever. Maybe
he would be born. Well, I don't know. I know he wouldn't be born.
Well, even Jennifer, this time around, we were watching it. It was like, well, what if the Terminator, what if he kills Kyle Reese before he has sex with Sarah Connor? Then I'm like, the John Connor doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Send Kyle Reese back, who can't die before impregnating Sarah Connor.
Exactly.
None of this
because
works.
if he doesn't impregnate Sarah Connor, then John Connor doesn't send him back.
Right. So it just
to impregnate Sarah Connor. It's a loop.
The universe implodes.
It doesn't make any sense. You're right. But
the only people that get this shit right are, I mean, obviously Marvel now is kind of doing all right with it, because you're just like, oh, there's a million multiverses.
Yeah,
It's just like, all
That's
right,
all.
well, so it's
Kyle Reese does say that he comes from a possible future, and that single line could be interpreted in so many ways that you could probably talk your way around paradoxes because of that single.
Yeah, you could, except for that she still experiences everything she does to get to the point that she has a photo that he has later on in the future. And it's
You're right.
Listen, not a possible future. It fucking happened. You have the photo.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. But here's the thing. I don't care.
I will say this for the Terminator. The Terminator is so fun that and it's Terminator 2 that first led me down this path that made me.
That's the one that started your thing with time travel,
because at the end of Terminator 2, when we get there, that's the one that broke me for the first time. Where I'm really looking forward to it. Makes any fucking sense, but time travel is it's tough, and Star Trek gets it right a little bit because they tend to you travel back in the past, you just create like a splintered timeline, or there's like Marvel multiverse. So it's like, oh yeah, now you can have the Chris Pine Kirk movies, and that's not the same timeline as the William Shatner Kirk movie.
Why does he look different?
Well, you look over that part. He's still the same guy.
Okay.
You get over that part. It's a different actor playing. Why does James Bond look different?
It's
James Bond is a whole different thing.
It was something with the GMOs in the food, and that's
James Bond is a code name, and every James Bond is actually a different person.
Exactly.
That's the rumor going around.
Yep.
So anyway, don't. People don't want me to spend an hour on this.
No,
it doesn't fucking
I think
work.
when we get to Terminator 2, I'm going to actually literally set a timer and say, you have 90 seconds to rant about this, Gary, and then we're done.
It doesn't make any goddamn sense. It
doesn't.
None of this movie makes sense.
Does that hurt your enjoyment of the movie? No, because it's so well made that I feel like you can look over that stuff, because who cares, honestly, in the long run? You're still telling a compelling story.
Yeah, it's still a fun movie. It's a cool concept. I like it. It's I actually, well, I mean, I've gone on record in the past, and we'll see. We're gonna watch Terminator 2 eventually, and I still I think Terminator is a 5-star movie. So like I just enjoy it, and I think I enjoyed as much, if not more, than the second one, which is the most popular.
Yeah,
I'm a horror fan. So as a horror fan, I really appreciate how scary Schwarzenegger actually is in this one. Like he's actually like legitimately like a cool horror villain, as well as being a sci-fi character. Like he's dead set on murdering Sarah Connor and does not stop. And he's Michael Myers from the future.
Yep. I'm kind of glad you brought that up about him, the Terminator kind of being a horror character, Gary, because I think what the Terminator is doing in terms of genre overall is kind of unheard of, because it is easy to call it a sci-fi movie because there's the time travel element, the future war stuff makes it sci-fi, but it's also easy to call it an action movie because, it's got set pieces, it's got car chases, gunfights, etc. And because Terminator 2 is undoubtedly a like capital A action movie.
Oh yeah.
But before the Terminator, can you think of another film that blended science fiction with this type of blunt force action? I think this was one of the first movies to really do that. Now it's become a very common thing post Terminator, but that's all because of the success of the Terminator. I think there were sci-fi movies, there were action movies before this, but there weren't ones that combined them in quite this way.
I think there were filmmakers who just didn't have the tech know-how. And I think that's what makes James Cameron, Jimmy Cameron, I think that's what makes him, head and shoulders above the rest. Is not only is he approaching it as an artist, but he is also approaching it with very, very tech savvy and very detail oriented along with that too. And it lends credibility. So, I mean, especially with like a lot of Roger Corman stuff and lower level sci-fi action type things, it's kind of like they had big ideas and, okay, we got this set piece, we've got, some good actors or whatever, but it just didn't hit.
Well,
right.
But a lot of those, even the sci-fi always took precedent where they were, people were shooting
or the action
were shooting.
did.
Yeah, it was one of the other. Like it was people were shooting lasers. It wasn't a sci-fi movie where people were shooting shotguns like in this.
Right.
Like this is very unique. Again, it's become common since then, but this was kind of a blend of those genres that hadn't really existed before.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're also talking about Terminator in terms of genre, this is going to what Gary was saying. I think this is a horror movie. As much as it is a sci-fi and as much as it is an action film, I think this is structured very much like a horror movie. The most obvious inspiration is Michael Myers for the Terminator himself, from John Carpenter's original Halloween. The Terminator is a relentless, unfeeling killing machine. If Michael Myers' inhumanity is what makes him so terrifying, you could say the same thing about the Terminator.
I think about things like movies like Jaws or even Gosh, I don't know. Like, I mean, more recently, like It Follows or something. Like the terrifying thing is this thing that just keeps coming and it never stops following you.
Yeah,
it never
that's
stops
all it
coming after
knows.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's what the Terminator is.
and
I mean,
the Terminator does that.
I mean, hell, Sarah Connor is the final girl in this. She is the final girl who the Terminator even gets his like comeback scene at the end, like is so common in slasher movies, only he comes back as a metal skeleton, but he gets his comeback scene. And then
but
Sarah Connor
if you can insert yourself into the situation, I mean, the thing will not stop. It will never stop until you blow it up, until it literally is nothing. It will keep trying to kill you. It will.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Even if it's like it's one half of itself, like it's been blown in half, it will still keep crawling towards you to try to murder you.
Yeah.
Until like it is nothing. Like it's literally not there anymore.
Yeah. So I mean, I think and I am certainly not the first person to have this thought, but I definitely think that the Terminator qualifies as a horror film. The first one does.
Oh yeah. Well, and I wanted to bring
absolutely.
this up too, because our friend Jack Odinson, who is a regular longtime listener, he even wrote me like before this one. He sent me a message, and he was excited for us to cover this movie again because the Terminator is one of his favorite films. He was also he started the conversation talking about how I had never seen Titanic, and he said that quote, I too have been avoiding Titanic. Maybe I will watch it before your episode on it, only if I could do it for free though. But I am excited to hear you guys talk about the Terminator, one of my all-time favorite movies again. Many people shit on every Terminator movie that came after T2, but for me, the Terminator is the best of them all. So because of it, I love them all, including the comics and the TV series, even though they don't hold up to part one. Arnold in the first film is the most frightening Terminator in the entire franchise. That movie is the darkest, most serious of the films. There is no camp, no comedic one-liners. Nothing about it is family friendly. When my daughter was little, I let her watch T2, but not the original Terminator for a long time. The T-1000 is a badass, but he is not the thing of nightmares like the T-800 from the original film.
I agree with him. And he's right that there is no real humor in this. Very, very little, at least. Maybe a little bit towards the beginning. The "I'll be back" line is funny if you know what's coming. But on the first viewing, you don't know that he's about to drive a car into the police station, which I love that sequence, by the way. But you don't know that. Now, second time you see it, he says, "I'll be back." That's funny because you know he's going to be back with an entire car coming through the window. So that works in retrospect, which James Cameron actually designed the scene that way so that people would find that funny on their second viewing, which is pretty fun. But he's right. Like I adore Terminator 2, one of my favorite movies of all time. But it definitely has a lot more one-liners, a lot more levity to it. This Terminator is terrifying. He is a monster, and they even make him look monstrous, not just with the the damage on his face, but when he first flies off the car, when he's holding onto the car and flies off, his hair gets burned away and his eyebrows are gone.
His eyebrows are gone, which makes it even more like
really
Michael
scary.
Myers.
Yes, it makes it more scary looking, which I think this is probably a good time to get into our further viewing segment, because I think John Carpenter's Halloween would actually make a pretty great double feature with the Terminator.
Right.
But what do you guys think would make a good companion to this one?
Well, Gary actually just mentioned it a second ago, Jaws. I love the idea of it's an animal, so it's not targeting them, but they're the only ones out there on the boat.
Tell that to Jaws too.
Right.
Where it is very much targeting them.
But I like the idea of the unstoppable killing machine. And yeah, my initial thought went to Jaws. I think you end up feeling for the characters in Jaws a little bit more. I think we see a little more of their humanity. I like because Terminator largely takes place at night, Jaws largely in the day. They are both to me summer movies, and I just that would be my
not a bad choice.
I would go Jaws then Terminator.
Cool.
Yeah,
Gary. What do you think?
Well, I kind of said, like you mentioned Halloween and It Follows and that kind of thing.
It Follows is a fun one. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, just the vibe of it. Just what is
Friday
scary about it. Yeah, and Friday the 13th. Yeah, Terminator. Yeah,
Arnold it's fucking Jason Voorhees. I want to see
Yeah.
Terminator versus Jason Voorhees. I want to watch that movie.
That would
sounds great, actually.
I'm in. Yeah, But yeah, I mean, there's other movies that, like, as far as the feel of them would probably work. I mean, as much as I hate it, and I don't want to bring it up just for the obvious reasons, but like Looper feels like it could fit with the Terminator.
I love Looper.
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't hate Looper. I just
it's the time travel shit
for the same reason.
Your stupid time travel hang up. It's a great movie though. It's a really great movie.
Movies like feel wise that, like, I get, like, I mean, this sounds crazy, but like The Guest, I even feel like
somebody suggested that to me. So I put a thing out on Twitter yesterday saying that I was looking for some like Terminator ripoff movies, which I was really looking for stuff that came out very close to the time of Terminator's release. But somebody mentioned The Guest, and I was like, you're right. Like, The Guest, like, he is the fucking Terminator in that movie. Like, he really is.
It's just like, it's a little different. I mean, the story obviously, but like, I mean, the guy's just like this fucking badass military experiment, basically. Like, it's kind of wicked.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, vibe wise, I mean, you could get it from, I mean, like, I think I mentioned Blade Runner earlier. Like, I guess you could get it from there and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd go like It Follows or Halloween or The Guest or something.
Yeah, I like those choices. I'm gonna get a little weird with my further viewing picks. I mean, obviously you could always do Terminator 2 as your follow-up.
There's a sequel?
But I do think you could do Terminator 2, and then of course you could continue on that journey that swiftly goes downhill through the rest of the sequels. But I want to talk about those Terminator ripoffs that I just mentioned. Because we already talked a little bit about how Roger Corman's company was producing films that were designed to capitalize on the popularity of the blockbusters at the time. You had Star Wars and Alien, the Roger Corman versions, even Piranha, what you mentioned, that was a Jaws cash in, right? But the Terminator, after it was success, had its own fair share of ripoffs, a lot more than almost any other movie. Honestly, there probably are, some of which became pretty popular, like Universal Soldier and stuff like that. But the ones I want to talk about are, there's two specifically. One is called Terminator 2 Shocking Dark. It was directed by Bruno Mattei, an Italian director who made a career out of doing ripoffs. He actually did his own Jaws ripoff called Cruel Jaws, which is absolutely incredible. If you've not seen Cruel Jaws, I think it's on Amazon Prime. Go watch it. It is ridiculous. Shocking Dark, it was released as Terminator 2 Shocking Dark. Now, if you look it up, it's usually just called Shocking Dark, probably because Amazon, who is has it streaming, doesn't want to get sued. But it was released originally in Italy as Terminator 2 Shocking Dark. It came out in 1990, a year before Terminator 2, the legit Terminator 2 came out, because Bruno Mattei knew that James Cameron was working on it and rushed it into production to beat the real T2 into theaters, which I love. And it's not a good movie. None of his movies are, but it is incredibly entertaining. And it's honestly more of an Aliens ripoff than a Terminator ripoff. It's about a group of like soldiers in a post-apocalyptic Venice and there are these creatures that they're having to hunt. It's very much Aliens until the end, when there's the Aliens, cyborg reveal, like Bishop, in Aliens, spoiler alert, I guess. But there's a person who ends up being like a reveal like that, but they're essentially a Terminator. So it becomes a Terminator movie in the last half an hour. And I watched it yesterday and I was texting Gary about it while I was watching it. I'm sorry for bugging you, Gary. I was enjoying myself. I was like, you got to watch this fucking movie, man. It's incredible, but it is super fun. And another one that I had a double feature of Terminator ripoffs last night. The other one is a little harder to find. I had to watch it on archive.org, the Internet Archive website, and like cast it to my television. But it's an Indonesian film released in 1988 called Lady Terminator. And I want so badly for like Vinegar Syndrome or somebody to do a proper like Blu-ray or 4K of this movie, because it looks incredible. Visually, it is really great. It is one of the wildest, most crowd-pleasing things that I've watched in a long time, where I'm like, this would slay with a group of people who like knew what they were getting into, as far as this is going to be a weird Terminator cash-in movie. Basically, these Indonesian movies, there were a lot of like genre movies coming out around this time, and they would often incorporate Indonesian folklore and stuff into them. This movie has this prelude where a sorceress of some type, she like curses, she gets scorned by a man and curses his like great granddaughter. Right. So then we cut to present day. The great granddaughter is an anthropologist. She's on the dig. She gets possessed by what appears to be a snake that crawls up her pussy.
Like Jason Goes to Hell.
Yeah. And then she becomes the Lady Terminator. Now, she's not a robot. She's a possessed woman, but she acts like the Terminator. She wears a leather jacket, and she's on a mission to kill this woman who is... No, I'm sorry. I said the great granddaughter was the one getting possessed. It's another lady getting possessed. She's hunting the great granddaughter, right? Which is the Sarah Connor character. Okay. But it like blatantly rips off specific scenes from Terminator. There's a police station assault. There's a scene in a dance club where they actually, the scene in the dance club in the Terminator where Terminator gets shot and they have a close up on his hand. You see his fingers move, and that's how you know he's still alive. Yeah, they have that exact shot. The Kyle Reese character says, "Come with me if you want to live." They're like, it is blatantly ripping off the Terminator in certain scenes and even dialogue, but it is incredible. It is like, if you love like a bad, I don't even want to call it so good it's bad. I think it's legitimately very enjoyable. It's a really fun movie. I hate that it's so hard to find, but I think either one of those would be really fun. I think the two of those together made a great double feature. So watch both of them if you want. There's also one that I found out about that I haven't watched yet, but there's one called Terminator 91, and it is a shot-for-shot remake of the Terminator made by teenagers with a camcorder, similar to the Raiders of the Lost Ark one. I don't know if you guys have you seen the documentary Raiders about the kids who made the shot-by-shot Raiders of the Lost Ark remake. There's a Terminator shot-by-shot remake that was made around the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've seen clips from it, but I haven't found the whole thing yet. But yeah, just Terminator knockoffs are fun. I don't know. But Lady Terminator and Shocking Dark are both well worth the effort to seek them out, I think.
I'm interested. I want to see this. I've always wanted to watch Cruel Jaws too, and I just never have. But...
It's on Amazon Prime right now. So you could have a little double feature, little Bruno Mattei double feature.
I'm sure
that's my further viewing. Anyway, it's just, they're fun. They're so much fun. Clearly made by people. At least Lady Terminator was clearly made by someone who has an actual affinity for the original Terminator. So when the Terminator came out, one of the people who saw the film on its original release was Harlan Ellison. Gary, I think you brought him up a little bit earlier. Harlan Ellison, very famous sci-fi writer, famously, what's the word? Cantankerous? I think that's a good word for Harlan Ellison.
That's fair.
And his reaction for the Terminator, he said, "I love the movie, was just blown away by it." This is a quote. "I love the movie, was just blown away by it. I walked out of the theater, went home, and called my lawyer." So Harlan Ellison alleged that the Terminator script took ideas from 2 episodes of the TV show The Outer Limits that he had written. The episodes were called Soldier and Demon with a Glass Hand. You can see a little bit where he's coming from. Soldier begins with 2 mysterious warriors from the future materializing in the present. And then the mechanical hand of Demon in a Glass Hand bears some resemblance to the Terminator robot's hand, right? But that's about where the similarities end. The story-wise, if you watch these, there's nothing in Ellison's writing that resembles the Terminator story at all. And like, how many other hundreds of sci-fi stories have included time travel and future warfare, right? I think he was just looking for some cash. I don't know, or looking to get his name in the press. Harlan Ellison, he's a great writer, but he not a pleasant man. So he sued them. He sued them for this. And instead of waging like a costly lawsuit or countersuit, Orion settled with Ellison out of court. I don't know for how much, but they settled out of court. And future prints of the Terminator actually in the credits have a credit that acknowledged him, that says like inspired by or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but
he's definitely in the credits.
Yeah, because I saw that and was just like, because I know him from writing City on the Edge of Forever, the very famous Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
And I was kind of floored by that. And because the print that I saw had his name in it, and I was like, really?
Yeah.
But
I think every print that you can find now is going to have it, other than that first run. So here's what Cameron had to say about this development with Harlan Ellison. He says, there's a quote: "It was a nuisance suit that could have easily been fought. I expected Hemdale and Orion to fight for my rights, but they abandoned me. The insurance company told me if I didn't agree to the settlement, they would have come after me personally for the damages if they lost the suit. Having no money at the time, I had no choice but to agree with the settlement. Of course, there was a gag order as well, so I couldn't tell this story, but now I frankly don't care. It's the truth. Harlan Ellison is a parasite who can kiss my ass."
Nice.
So not mincing words, that James Cameron.
I love that. This is from 1984 movie review, James Cameron interviewed by David Chute, Chute. But they ask him about what he wanted to get out of this. The question is people said of Alien when it first came out, and it's also true of Outland and Blade Runner and Terminator, that it presented the future in a very grim light because that's what people find plausible now. The future won't be better than the present. It's going to all be the worst aspects of the present intensified. The current audience seems to take that notion for granted. James Cameron said, "It's depressing when you watch interviews with high school kids the day after the movie, and see that they've come to just accept the inevitability of nuclear war. And the Terminator, the fact of nuclear war is thrown away with the complete understanding that people just buy it. It's part of the fabric of the story. On the other hand, it tried to say that you take responsibility for your own life and for the life of society. The Terminator looks like death. And if you want to read into it, it is a death image. Linda Hamilton's character faces that image of death or fate and survives. All that has resonance, I hope, with the dark, premonitory character of Reese's future flashbacks, as I call them, and with the final image of driving off into a storm, is that it is fate versus will." And so, anyway, that's wanted to get that out there because there is the future. Like I think Terminator gets lumped in with like nuclear wars and inevitability. Like this is the future, blah blah blah. He's just saying like we just accepted that there is a future where shit happens and there's robots running things, and no, it's just about death coming for you. And Linda Hamilton looks it in the face and survives and like keeps moving, and it's like fate versus will. I like that.
I like that.
Todd, did you like the Terminator?
I did like the Terminator. If I had to get picky about it, there were a couple of shots, like especially the driving shots, where you can tell they sped up the film speed a little bit, and then that sort of took me out of it a little, just a little bit. But other than that, I think the concept is so great, and really, other than a few style things from the 80s, it's kind of timeless.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a whole lot of things that are specific to 1984 other than Linda Hamilton's mullet. But yeah, I think this is really great, and it was my first viewing, and I'm really happy.
Oh fuck, I fucking forgot about that.
Yeah, this is my first time watching it.
Oh my god, that's wild, Todd.
Yeah.
I totally forgot you told us that you had never seen this before.
Yeah, same. I was
That's
just asking that, and I totally forgot. How is this the first time you've seen the Terminator?
It's just one of those ones that slipped by me,
So it was during post-production on the Terminator that Cameron and Gail Ann Hurd's relationship evolved from a professional one to a romantic one. Now, I mentioned he was married. I'm not sure exactly when that marriage dissolved, but at some point that marriage dissolved, and he started a romantic relationship with Gail Ann Hurd. And it seemed like the two were made for each other. They were both kind of adrenaline junkies. They would race each other down the LA freeways to meetings. He'd bought a Porsche with the money that he'd made off of the Terminator. She had a sports car, and they would race each other to meetings. Their date activities, including they would like go out to the desert and shoot AK-47s at firing ranges. They would ride horses. They'd go scuba diving. They were both like, they were kind of two peas in a pod, and they ended up getting married in 1985. The Terminator, of course, we all know, would spawn a franchise that would include 5 sequels so far. a TV show, which I happen to really enjoy, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
It was really good.
Very underrated. It's really
Yeah.
good. A theme park ride, if you remember Terminator T2 in 3D, which was the Universal Studios back in the 90s. Not to mention countless video games, comic books, novels, toys, everything that you can put the Terminator face on has been out there. It is, I think, to this day, Arnold Schwarzenegger's most iconic role, although I think that might be more due to Terminator 2, even more so than this one. But I would say that, I mean, when he became the governor, they called him the Governator, right? Like, like he will always be known as the Terminator. But this is the movie that made him a star. You know, I mentioned this before, but he'd already been famous, but Terminator turned him into something more than human almost. You know, he became like an icon. Like he is one of the most famous people who has ever lived. He would spend the next decade or so after the Terminator playing characters who were fundamentally unreal, even when they were technically supposed to be human, like the character in Commando, which came out a couple years after this. He technically is human in that, but he basically is the Terminator in that. He's just a good guy. And in the years following the Terminator, he became the biggest movie star on the planet. And it all started with a little $6 million B movie that nobody really had any faith in, including Arnold himself. But I also think that Linda Hamilton deserves just as much credit for the Terminator success as Schwarzenegger does. In the same way that we mentioned Halloween, I think that movie was successful largely because of Jamie Lee Curtis. Because she anchors the film in realism. Linda Hamilton anchors the film in realism. She gives it a heart. She's the audience surrogate, the ordinary person that's dropped into a crazy situation and she's forced to adapt to survive. And throughout the film, we see her toughen up. You know, I mentioned this when we talked about her casting, but she is, by the end of the film, she's like a certified badass, you know, when she destroys the Terminator. She starts off as just a flustered waitress who's going out on a date with her girlfriend, and by the end she's a badass, and it makes it so that when we see her as the sort of muscular, sinewy, mentally disturbed killing machine in Terminator 2, it's not really that jarring. You know, you could believe that the person she becomes at the end of Terminator could be the Sarah Connor we see in Terminator 2,
like the Jamie Lee Curtis Laurie Strode from 2018's Halloween.
Right,
like,
exactly.
She's just a badass. Yeah. Like she's just a traumatized, fucked up lady who will kill you. I think all that's true. It's one of those situations where it's like, I can't think of a better example than this. I'm going to do it. But if you're talking about pro wrestling, like people talk about like the WWF and Vince McMahon or Hulk Hogan, and it's like Vince McMahon created the whole thing, right? Like it all exists because of Vince McMahon, but also it has a little more weight to it because of Hulk Hogan being Hulk Hogan.
Right.
And so it's a little different, but you get my point. It's the Terminator would be cool, and you could argue it would still be a successful thing without Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Arnold Schwarzenegger brought something to it that would not exist without Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, there's just certain aspects of it that just wouldn't be the same if Arnold Schwarzenegger hadn't been in the position of being the star.
I don't know that it would be as iconic as it is now.
Yeah,
I don't know that it would. I think James Cameron's an excellent director, so it probably would have still been successful, but would it have been as successful without Arnold in that lead role? If it were, say, Lance Henriksen in that lead role, I don't think it would have. I think Arnold brought something that elevated it to another aspect. I think it was much like your wrestling analogy. It was the combination of their talents that made it what it is. You know, it wasn't just one or just the other. It was either one of them are great, but bringing them together in this is what made this the project that it became.
Yeah. All the quotable stuff, the likenesses, the imagery from the thing is like, it's just, that's as much Arnold as it is anything Cameron did, which is cool. You know, it's good. It launched James Cameron, and he's going to go on to make plenty of more money doing other things. And so is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah. And Cameron has no complaints. I mean, I definitely found in the latter part of that last interview I was talking about, he says Terminator was in some ways the ultimate experience for me. I got to conceive the idea, write the script, have a deal made, storyboard the major scenes, go about creating those images and casting and sets, locations, then film it and compare the finished shots to the storyboards and see a satisfyingly similar type of image. For me, it was a clean sweep. I got to do every single thing I wanted to do.
Yeah. And of course, this would lead to a sequel that we all know and love. That would be a few years away at this point, though. After the success of the Terminator, Cameron had gone from kind of a B movie nobody to Hollywood's golden boy all of a sudden, which put him in a unique position to choose his next film. He probably could have chosen just about anything he wanted, but there was still that Alien sequel that he'd been working on. And he was warned after the Terminator came out, he was kind of warned by Hollywood executives to not take that job. You don't need this now. This is going to be career suicide if you immediately follow up your success with a sequel to somebody else's film, because anything you do that's good on that film will just be linked to Ridley Scott. And if it's a bomb, that'll be blamed on you. That's what people were telling him. But Cameron, as we know, does whatever the fuck he wants to do. And he loved Ridley Scott's Alien, and he wanted to make the sequel.
He said, it can't be enough that I created a whole franchise of shit. I've also want to be in every single discussion about sequels that are better than the originals. I want to be also considered in those conversations. I have to be everywhere.
I mean, I don't think Aliens is better than the original.
I'm just saying, like, when the conversation comes up about sequels that are better than the original, or sequels that are as good as the original, or any
sequels that are at least good, that are at least in conversation.
I mean, I don't either. I mean, I'm part of the rare breed that might think that the original Terminator is better than T2, but two of the movies that you'll hear come up in those conversations are T2 and Aliens.
Just wait till Avatar, the something of water comes out, I guess.
That's a whole other thing we're gonna have to dig in.
You never know.
Later on. Yeah, but it's true.
You never know. But the story of Aliens, which is the movie we'll be covering on our next episode, of course, it does once again show Cameron proving the establishment wrong. They told him not to take this gig. He did it, and he proved them wrong. Yeah. But like we're gonna say that on every episode, but that's what we'll be talking about on our next episode. I really appreciate everyone listening to this extra long episode. There was a lot to cover here, not only on Terminator but on James Cameron's career, and I think all that early stuff we talked about in this episode about his days with Roger Corman and working on Piranha 2, I think all that feeds into what he accomplished on the Terminator. So I think it's a very important part of his story for that very reason. So we appreciate you all listening along for this long episode.
I don't appreciate you at all. I don't mean that. This is an extra long episode. We could have split into two parts like we did with Alien, but you guys got patience. We believe that people will just start and stop it.
Yeah, you don't have to listen to it all in one go.
Yeah. I haven't been.
Yeah. I don't listen to any podcast that way.
I haven't been listening to Justin talk all in one go here. I've just been like zoning in and out when I
reading his own notes every now and then.
Yeah. I'm just like, I think this will fit here. And sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. It gets lucky. And Todd, he's been sleeping most of the time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing with this because there's so much in there that Justin just unpacked, history wise. And now I'm looking forward to seeing the progression of Jimmy Cameron as he progresses through his career and what that means for later films.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to hate you if you keep calling him that this whole time.
That joke's already worn its welcome.
Yep. But it's going to happen. Just wait for it.
But I will say, I just tried to judge you for not seeing the Terminator. And we're also going to hit on Titanic, which is arguably just as huge. And I've never seen it. So
it's the highest grossing movie of all time, Gary.
Okay. So not arguably just as huge.
Anyway, I guess that's it for this episode. Thanks again. We'll be talking about Aliens next time. Of course, you can find all of our episodes at cinemashock.net. We just recently redesigned the website, trying to make it a little more streamlined. So
it looks great.
Thanks, man. I tried. You can find that at cinemashock.net. You can find all our episodes plus links to Discord and our t-shirt shop and all that stuff. You can also find us at cinema_shock on Twitter and Instagram. We are also on YouTube, which Gary's been working on, getting all of our episodes up on YouTube, along with some bonus material and things like that up there. And of course, subscribe, like, all that stuff. Please tell your friends. If you have friends who are into movies, who are specifically into like film history and genre film history, and you think that they would be into the stories behind these movies, like the making of the Terminator, just share this podcast with them, share this episode with them, or look back in our archives and share another episode that you know that they're into, that they might enjoy hearing about how it was made. Where can you guys be found on the internet for any of our listeners to follow?
Well, you can check out more Star Trekky goodness on my podcast, the Computer Resume podcast, where we cover the entire franchise in chronological order. And you can reach the show at Computer Resume on all of the socials. You can find the show pretty much anywhere you download podcasts. And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
I am at This Is Gary Horne on all of the things. Anywhere you can find that name, it's probably me.
Also TIPW show.
Also at the at TIPW show, not the TIPW show.
TIPW show, his wrestling podcast.
That's wrestling.
And
I
I am
do stuff for the NWA sometimes at NWA. Not
the rap group.
Not the rap group.
Yeah,
not for lack of trying.
Although if they offered you the job,
I don't know. It feels like easy way to get canceled if I keep saying I'm one of the NWA. So I don't know.
I am at Justin_Bishop. Again, find the show at Cinema Shock everywhere. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Come with me if you want the keys.
Nice and simple. I like it.
That was good. I am impressed.
Thank you. I was gonna do a whole big long drawn out one, but it was just like
this whole episode's long and drawn out. So that's
good.
Good choice.
I like right before that though. You said I was gonna big it, so I wanted to see.